Hey everyone, I want to tell you guys about an experience that me and my brother shared about 2 years ago. So, we were deciding to go somewhere hunting during the day, and there's this cemetery in Santa Cruz that we wanted to check out. We go in and walk around, and nothing out of the ordinary happens, so we decide to leave. The cemetery is on a supposed haunted road that leads up into the woods, and this road is said to be haunted by a lady in white that tries to hitchhike into your car with you. I had forgotten about this fact until after the day. But anyway, along this road that we were driving down, it leads into a forested area. A couple of miles down from the cemetery, you can pull to the side of the road and walk along this hiking trail. So we decide to hike this trail because I completely forgot the road was also haunted, so I wasn't even looking for anything paranormal. But we start hiking this trail in the afternoon. 10 minutes into the trail, and we stumble along abandoned train tracks and a barely standing bridge for the train that used to run alongside of those tracks. It looks cool, so we decide to go down this hill right by the bridge that lets you go under the dilapidated bridge. We go down there and we just sort of mess around for a bit, looking at the cool architecture and all that. After we had our view, we start back up the hill that leads back to the trail. When we get to the top, we're a little bit exhausted because the hill is kind of steep, and you have to use the trees around you as sort of leverage to climb back up. So we're just kind of standing around back on the trail when we both notice something out of the ordinary. We hear a voice like a grown man shouting and screaming really angrily. And when I say angry, I mean this guy was furious. What I mean is that the voice sounded like a rage-filled, hatefully murderous man taking it out on someone. We quieten down, and I can tell the voice is pretty far away. In fact, it almost sounded like it was in the mountains around us. It sounded more than 500 feet away for sure, though. We both just look at each other like, what was that? Well, we stand around listening for like 15 seconds, and the next thing we know, the voice came down the trail from what sounded like hundreds of feet away to being like right down the end of the trail. And I mean, the inhuman speed the voice came closer to us was definitely unnatural. I noticed the voice coming from down the trail, and I'm thinking to myself, this voice sounds like it's from someone who's about to kill someone out of rage. But the weird thing is that the voice is speaking in what I can only call is like gibberish. I understood not one word it was saying. I instantly get this fight or flight feeling all in my body because this voice starts getting very loud and closer to us at inhuman speeds. I tell my brother to pick up some huge sticks with me to defend ourselves with because even though the voice came out of nowhere and moved down the trail at lightning speeds, I still had the assumption that it was some kind of a crazy person ready to kill someone. We pick up the sticks and then we just run down the trail back to the car as quickly as we can. But here's the weird part. So as we're running away from this voice that's coming down the other end of the trail, I hear the voice come up behind us in like an instant. It sounded like he was no more than 10 feet behind us, I would guess, chasing us back to the car. I turn around even though I don't want to because I have to see how close this psycho is from us, and as I look back and hear the voice right behind me, I don't see anyone. I tell my brother to run faster because the voice is right behind us yelling in absolute rage, but I don't see anyone chasing us. We start picking up speed though, and the craziest thing in my life happened because the voice starts panning around us in like a 360 audio. What I mean is that I hear the voice yelling in gibberish right behind me, then it starts to pan to my left through the trees just off the trail, then the voice is right in front of us, and it slides to the right side of the trail and then back to behind us, all in a matter of, at most, like 10 seconds. At this point though, me and my brother are really creeped out obviously, and ran the rest of the trail back to the car. The voice kept following us down the trail, and I remember after hearing the voice panning around us and hearing it reverberate through the woods, I started praying to God to help me come out of this one alive, and after we make it around halfway down the trail to my car, the voice just instantly disappears. I remember slowing down exhausted, and we start talking about what we heard. I asked my brother if he also heard the voice slide in circles around us, and he said that he heard it too. And at that point, I knew that I wasn't hallucinating or imagining it. I asked my brother if he heard how it sounded like gibberish too, but sort of like a man screaming at the top of his lungs in rage, and he said that he heard the same thing. We finally get into the car, and I drive us the heck out of there in a heartbeat. I remember the car ride was silent for like 5 minutes as we just sort of sat there thinking about what just happened. I think it was at that point too that I remembered that the whole road was allegedly haunted and that not just the cemetery was. I had been down that trail alone a few months before this experience though, and I had nothing weird happen. Nothing like this anyway. This was one of the weirdest things that I've ever experienced in my life though. And to this day, I have never gone back down that trail, and I never plan on it either. Everything that I've shared with you guys, though, as crazy as it sounds, I know, is the absolute truth, and I promise you that I haven't altered anything. The Santa Cruz area and the mountains are known for cults and some pretty dark magic being performed in them, apparently. And if you guys have any questions about our experience, then please feel free to ask. And also, if you have any ideas about what happened, then I really would love to hear your thoughts. So I go to a high school with about 500 people. This happened during my sophomore year. I'm a junior now. And Mark had other issues before this happened. He started cutting his arms in class. I was sitting 2 seats away from him and watched the blood just roll down his arm. He ended up being reported to the office and was even sent to the YOC for about a month, if I'm right. The YOC is basically this youth opportunity center. It's a mental hospital sort of juvie center for kids, and he came back and he honestly seemed fine. He said that he was never really suicidal, that he only cut his arms for attention, which made sense for him because of his kind of, messed up childhood. But on the day everything happened, I had no clue about anything. So during my 6th hour class, the school resource officer appeared at the door of the classroom. One of my friends was standing behind him. The SRO told my teacher that he needed me immediately. I had no clue what was going on. I just thought that I was being randomly drug tested or something, as it's pretty common in my school. I tried asking why we were going to the office in the first place, and I didn't get any response. He took the 2 of us into the conference room where 2 police officers were standing, and they questioned me first. As I walked into the room, he shut and locked the door behind me. One of the police officers blocked the door, the other blocked the window. I was sort of petrified at this stage because I had no clue what was going on. But the conversation went like this. "Have you heard anything today?" About what?" "There were threats made against our school. Your name came up in conversation." "What do you mean my name came up in conversation? I haven't heard anything. Who made the threats? And who said that I would know anything about it?" "Mark made the threats. When we questioned some other people, your name popped up and they said that you might know something." "Who said my name?" "We can't tell you." I understand that they probably couldn't tell me who said it due to confidentiality reasons, but it's so frustrating to be locked in a room with 3 police officers who are acting like you've done something wrong like that, especially when you haven't, and you don't know what is going on or who said these things. To this day, I still have no clue who mentioned me by my name. "Well, I've heard nothing. The only class that I have with him is 5th period, and he wasn't there today. We don't talk outside of class either, and the only reason that we talk in that class is because, we sit at the same table, so we have to work together some days." "Are you sure?" "I'm positive. I don't know anything. All of this is news to me as well, man." "Well, okay. You're free to go." They opened the door, took my friend in, and I went back to class. I was kind of off in shock, but as soon as I walked through my class door, everyone was bombarding me with questions about what had happened. I ignored them and I put my head down for the rest of the class, but later that night I saw on Facebook that the school had posted a message. I don't remember what it was exactly due to it being deleted quickly, but from my recollection it said something like, parents and students of my school, 2 students reported that another student had made threats against our school. We've handled the situation and there's nothing to worry about. The actual post was longer, but I honestly don't remember it. But I told my parents about everything that happened that day, and they immediately wanted some more information. I couldn't give it to them, obviously, and at that point, I didn't know about the hit list or even his arrest. All I knew was that SG had threatened to shoot up the school. And the next day, the crap really hit the fan. I found out that he had told people about his plans during first hour, and he was taken out of class and arrested during fourth hour. He was going to do it during fifth hour, start with the class that he was in, which I was in too, and then he would head to the cafeteria. And man, do I still get chills when I think of this very moment. During lunch, my best friend came up to me and told me about the hit list Mark wrote, and even showed her during first hour. She didn't get the chance to tell me the day before, but the other guy who was there confirmed everything as well. And they both said that I was allegedly on it. I was the third name down, and evidently he described in detail how he was going to kill me. And luckily, somebody else stopped it from happening, or else I would be dead before I even got to graduate high school. To this day, I still don't know why he could have possibly wanted to kill me like that. I barely even spoke to the guy. I was polite in class if I had to work with him, and we had no negative interactions, so I honestly have no clue what I did to make him so desperately want to kill me. As I understand it, he did have a gun in his locker as well. It wasn't a joke like his friends thought. He really intended to do it. I was relieved that I was alive and that nothing happened, obviously, but I was also out of mind with horror at the thought of someone plotting my death like that. About 2 weeks later, though, my dad and I got into the Dollar General in our town. Keep in mind, my dad has no clue what Mark looks like. We walk in to buy something for dinner, and I see Mark out of the corner of my eye. He's staring at me so intensely that I just wanted to run out of the store, but I stuck close to my dad and told him to hurry. He looked at me confused, and I told him that I would explain it later. Mark was following us around the store, and I could barely breathe. I don't have the words to describe just how scared I was, but my dad and I got what we needed, left the store, and we got in the truck. As soon as I was in the truck, too, the doors were locked, and my dad turned to me and asked, "Who was that? He looked like he wanted you dead or something." And I replied that was Mark. At this point, we were thoroughly panicked, not only because he was roaming free, but because he knew where I lived. We had security cameras, sure, but knowing that person who has adamantly expressed his desire to kill you knows where you live, man, it's terrifying. The school, as well, has since acted like this never even happened. In fact, one of the administrators told me and my family that we were overreacting when we wanted to know if he'd be back at school because, according to them, I was never in any real danger. Luckily, or perhaps sadly, the kid is no longer at my school, and he's currently in some type of jail because he actually murdered his own mother. He pushed her down the stairs, and she was allegedly found dead in some sort of makeshift body bag. Thankfully, he was caught, and I don't think that he's going to get out anytime soon, but still, man, what a wild ride that was. In August, me and the lads got together and decided to visit an abandoned World War II barracks that was hit by bombs. I was carrying a knife on me because, well, it comes in very handy from time to time, and this is kind of vital to the story as well. So we explored the exterior in search of an entrance, until we found a smashed-in window in the east wing that wasn't hit as bad. The window had been long since smashed in, and there was now no glass anywhere. So we climbed in and arrived in a bare concrete room, and immediately I heard something skitter across the floor, presumably a mouse. We walked through the corridors and rooms of the east wing until we came into what we thought was the sick bay, which was in the west wing that was hit badly by bombs. This one room that we go into has rubble around the entrance, and the wooden roof is caved in as well, and there's ash and the walls are blackened and whatnot. At the back of the room there is this sort of blackened and rusty metal desk, and the desk has a drawer in it. I try to open the drawer, but it's sort of rusted shut, so I go to pull out my knife and pry it open, but when I do, it isn't there. I assume that I must have dropped it on the way in or something, and that I would have to find it on the way out, so I use a rotting plank of wood instead and try and pry it open. But when I finally do get it open, I receive probably the biggest shock of my life, because inside there is my knife and a rusty ashtray with a smouldering cigarette in it, meaning that it must have been put in there while we were in the room. And well, at that, we just legged it out straight away. Now, we try to dismiss it as a delinquent playing tricks on us or something, but all of us know that the drawer was rusted shut and that there was a smouldering cigarette in there that must have been put there whilst we were in that barracks at some point. Hey everyone, I want to tell you guys about an experience that me and my brother shared about 2 years ago. So, we were deciding to go somewhere hunting during the day, and there's this cemetery in Santa Cruz that we wanted to check out. We go in and walk around, and nothing out of the ordinary happens, so we decide to leave. The cemetery is on a supposed haunted road that leads up into the woods, and this road is said to be haunted by a lady in white that tries to hitchhike into your car with you. I had forgotten about this fact until after the day. But anyway, along this road that we were driving down, it leads into a forested area. A couple of miles down from the cemetery, you can pull to the side of the road and walk along this hiking trail. So we decide to hike this trail because I completely forgot the road was also haunted, so I wasn't even looking for anything paranormal. But we start hiking this trail in the afternoon. 10 minutes into the trail, and we stumble along abandoned train tracks and a barely standing bridge for the train that used to run alongside of those tracks. It looks cool, so we decide to go down this hill right by the bridge that lets you go under the dilapidated bridge. We go down there and we just sort of mess around for a bit, looking at the cool architecture and all that. After we had our view, we start back up the hill that leads back to the trail. When we get to the top, we're a little bit exhausted because the hill is kind of steep, and you have to use the trees around you as sort of leverage to climb back up. So we're just kind of standing around back on the trail when we both notice something out of the ordinary. We hear a voice like a grown man shouting and screaming really angrily. And when I say angry, I mean this guy was furious. What I mean is that the voice sounded like a rage-filled, hatefully murderous man taking it out on someone. We quieten down, and I can tell the voice is pretty far away. In fact, it almost sounded like it was in the mountains around us. It sounded more than 500 feet away for sure, though. We both just look at each other like, what was that? Well, we stand around listening for like 15 seconds, and the next thing we know, the voice came down the trail from what sounded like hundreds of feet away to being like right down the end of the trail. And I mean, the inhuman speed the voice came closer to us was definitely unnatural. I noticed the voice coming from down the trail, and I'm thinking to myself, this voice sounds like it's from someone who's about to kill someone out of rage. But the weird thing is that the voice is speaking in what I can only call is like gibberish. I understood not one word it was saying. I instantly get this fight or flight feeling all in my body because this voice starts getting very loud and closer to us at inhuman speeds. I tell my brother to pick up some huge sticks with me to defend ourselves with because even though the voice came out of nowhere and moved down the trail at lightning speeds, I still had the assumption that it was some kind of a crazy person ready to kill someone. We pick up the sticks and then we just run down the trail back to the car as quickly as we can. But here's the weird part. So as we're running away from this voice that's coming down the other end of the trail, I hear the voice come up behind us in like an instant, It sounded like he was no more than 10 feet behind us, I would guess, chasing us back to the car. I turn around, even though I don't want to, because I have to see how close this psycho is from us. And as I look back and hear the voice right behind me, I don't see anyone. I tell my brother to run faster because the voice is right behind us yelling in absolute rage, but I don't see anyone chasing us. We start picking up speed though, and the craziest thing in my life happened, because the voice starts panning around us in like a 360 audio. What I mean is that I hear the voice yelling in gibberish right behind me, then it starts to pan to my left through the trees just off the trail, then the voice is right in front of us, and it slides to the right side of the trail and then back to behind us, all in a matter of, at most, like 10 seconds. At this point though, me and my brother are really creeped out, obviously, and ran the rest of the trail back to the car. The voice kept following us down the trail, and I remember after hearing the voice panning around us and hearing it reverberate through the woods, I started praying to God to help me come out of this one alive, and after we make it around halfway down the trail to my car, the voice just instantly disappears. I remember slowing down exhausted, and we start talking about what we heard. I asked my brother if he also heard the voice slide in circles around us, and he said that he heard it too. And at that point, I knew that I wasn't hallucinating or imagining it. I asked my brother if he heard how it sounded like gibberish too, but sort of like a man screaming at the top of his lungs in rage, and he said that he heard the same thing. We finally get into the car, and I drive us the heck out of there in a heartbeat. I remember the car ride was silent for like 5 minutes as we just sort of sat there thinking about what just happened. I think it was at that point too that I remembered that the whole road was allegedly haunted and that not just the cemetery was. I had been down that trail alone a few months before this experience though, and I had nothing weird happen. Nothing like this anyway. This was one of the weirdest things that I've ever experienced in my life though. And to this day, I have never gone back down that trail, and I never plan on it either. Everything that I've shared with you guys, though, as crazy as it sounds, I know, is the absolute truth, and I promise you that I haven't altered anything. The Santa Cruz area and the mountains are known for cults and some pretty dark magic being performed in them, apparently. And if you guys have any questions about our experience, then please feel free to ask. And also, if you have any ideas about what happened, then I really would love to hear your thoughts. When I was 16, I would nanny for 2 boys, Brandon, who was 8, and Randy, who was 15. Now, Randy had mental health problems because he was born with liquid in his brain, or something like that. By the way, though, he really was a sweetheart, but you could tell that something was off by the way that he walked and moved his hands. They also had a dog, Gunner, that was an Akita and Yellow Lab mixed. This dog was huge and very protective. I watched the kids every other week, all day Monday and Friday, and Gunner watched everything that I did the first week. I had to gain this dog's trust. That first week the dog made me uneasy because if I was with the kids and they'd start being loud and rambunctious, he would get between me and the boys and start growling. This happened even if I wasn't playing with them and happened to be near them. Gunner learned to trust me pretty quickly though, and there were 2 times that Gunner actually saved our lives. So, the boys lived in a pretty rough neighborhood. Not scary or anything, but just rough around the edges. We went for a walk to the playground a couple of blocks away, and a white van slows down by us. There were a bunch of ghetto guys yelling at us from the windows, saying inappropriate things to me, the female, and calling Randy horrible names about his condition. I said, just ignore them, guys, in a sort of hushed voice as I shifted and pulled myself and Gunner between the kids. Gunner, though, didn't take his eyes off the van full of them. The tension pulled the fur on his back straight up, signaling to us that he was in protective mode. As the men kept yelling at us, I pulled my phone out and started dialing 911, but I didn't hit send before Brandon started yelling back, defending his brother. And then, everything happened so quickly. The slider back door to the van opened and the 2 men jumped out. I remember screaming "run" at the boys just as Gunner ripped himself free from my grip on his leash, and everyone started running except me. The boys sprinted home, the dog sprinted towards the van, and I frantically tried dialing 911. Gunner chased the men back into the van, nearly grabbing the leg of one of the men, and they sped off. Gunner received a lot of treats and praises when we returned home that day, let me tell you. But the second time, this one still really freaks me out. So, I was allowed to have friends stop by since I practically lived there anyway, and the boys liked hanging out with my wholesome teenage friends too. If it was a male though, I would always have to go outside and hug them where Gunner could see and talk to them for a few minutes on the porch. Gunner would sort of assess them. Normally he would let them inside without trouble after that, but there was one friend that he just wouldn't let inside without coaxing. Gunner would never actually bite anyone unless they attacked, just for context, but one day a man came to the door, knocked and said that he had to drop something off for their mum who was supposedly expecting him. We could see through the window that he seemed like a gentleman and was really nice, but as I approached the door, Gunner sort of cut me off. He started barking at the door insanely. His back stood higher than my hips, mind you, and at the time I was a pretty small girl, and the dog just sort of forced me back. Gunner literally prevented me from being able to reach the doorknob. He was gentle with me, but still forceful. I yelled back to the guy to leave whatever it was on the porch, but he seemed pretty insistent, saying things like, "Can you really not just unlock the door for a minute? Come on, Randy knows me," etc. But in the end, I just had to tell him that I physically couldn't get to the door, so I could call the mum for him if he wanted. But then the man got really weird and was like, "Oh no, that's not necessary. I'll just come back another time, okay?" And just sort of rushed off. Anyway, the guy had some distinct features, and when I described him to the mum later, she informed me that she had no idea who he was and that she wasn't expecting anything. We never did find out who he was either, and he never did come back. But anyway, I think Gunner was onto something that day, and I'm sure glad that he was there. Around November of 2019, I was running to a Target or something for some cupcakes decorating supplies, before meeting my aunt and cousin for lunch later that day at a relatively nice restaurant. This being the case, I was slightly dressed up, nothing too fancy, but I did look slightly older. It was around 10 in the morning, and I was walking to my car from the Target. I parked pretty far back in the parking lot because I hate fighting for parking spaces. When suddenly, a truck quickly pulls into a parking spot a little in front of me, and a man gets out. I was pretty freaked out as he started to walk up to me, and he asks if I'm single and tells me that I'm the most beautiful woman that he's ever seen. I tell him that I'm actually underage and have a boyfriend. I was lying about the boyfriend, to which he replies that he would wait. This dude had to be at least 40 though, and he then gets back into his truck and backs into a spot at the back of the parking lot of this particular shopping centre. I was about halfway to my car at this point, but no way in heck was I going in my car because he was just sort of sitting there watching me. So instead, I walked into a nearby frozen yogurt place. I looked visibly panicked, and I quickly grabbed a cup of yogurt and tried to look natural because this guy was looking at me through the windows. I called my best friend who lives in the neighborhood close to the shopping center, and he quickly said that he'd be there soon. About 10 to 12 minutes later, my friend came and he picked me up from the yogurt place. When we pulled out of the parking lot, the dude in the truck started to follow us though. We started to drive around as I texted my aunt that I needed to push the lunch back about 30 minutes. My friend and I took a bunch of back roads in the area and drove through some confusing neighborhoods, but eventually we lost the guy. My friend is an absolute hero for this, and he took me back to my car in the parking lot. I was going to run some more small errands before going to lunch, but that obviously didn't happen that day. For a bit of background, I actually live in a pretty rural area. Not too rural, where the nearest house is like a mile away or something, but definitely the back roads of a small town. My house lies on a 6-acre plot that was sort of half-cut grass, half forest, and had a pond. We shared a long curvy driveway with 2 other neighbours on a hill, and that was pretty much it though. So, it was late summer, and I got the whole house to myself for most of the day, and well into the night as well. My mum and 2 brothers were in Utah to visit our sister in college. My dad was working late, and my little sister was at a marching band competition. My little sister and I stayed behind because we both had youth camp that began 2 weeks before the trip to Utah was going to be over. But anyway, it was around 10 p.m. and I was just sort of hanging out in the living room where the computer was located watching some YouTube. Our living room had a sliding door that opened to a deck and then to the massive yard, so I could see the road that went behind our house faintly if I turned on the back light. I started to get hungry at some point, and so I got up from the living room and walked to the kitchen to grab a snack. The kitchen had a few windows, so I could look out on the front lawn and the driveway. I peeked out because I was bored, and I saw a black truck drive by the road at the bottom of the hill slowly, which was strange considering that I've only seen people speed down at pushing 70 miles per hour. It's the back road, so no cops ever come by. And in the end, I just sort of shrugged it off and went back to watching some YouTube in the living room, but my eyes kept drifting out to the road behind our house where I keep seeing this black truck. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but that street was actually a dead end, so a truck driving up and down it at like 10 p.m. was a little bit weird. I was getting pretty tired though, and so I went upstairs to my bedroom, which also had a very good view of the backyard, but it was pretty dark, so hard to see. And I don't really remember what time it was when I heard an engine rev at what seemed to be out of the shared driveway. I kind of bolted up, and being the paranoid person that I was, I assumed the worst. And quite frankly, I think it was my paranoia that actually saved me this day, because I crept down the stairs to get a look to smooth myself over and prove that nothing was there. But looking at the kitchen window, I saw the black truck in my part of the driveway, headlights off, and faint shadows of 2 guys climbing out. Freaking out now, I paced a bit, trying to think, but nothing more came to my mind than to grab a knife and hide, and so that's what I did in the end. I hid behind a corner next to the door, and I heard 2 knocks. Once they faded away, I heard the door handle begin to jiggle, and I took a deep breath and yelled out, "I have a weapon! Get away from my house or else I'll use it!" I said this so loud too that I probably woke up both the neighbours by the simple volume of it. A moment later, I heard the faintest, "Oh crap," and then soon after, the sound of tyres quickly going down the dirt driveway and fading away. I was so scared that I was shaking, but around midnight, my dad finally came home with my little sister, who also got first place, props to her, and I didn't speak anything of it in the end. Most people trying to break in will run off when they find out someone is still home, so making any noise will raise your chances to avoid a robbery. If I wasn't so paranoid, though, that I had to go and check to calm myself down like I did, I probably would have been in much more danger. A kidnap, a rape, killed, I don't know, but I think back to that day once in a while, and I'm probably never going to stay home alone, very late anyway, ever again. My parents had a friend who was a single mother of a child around my age, just a year older. And because of that, we obviously got to hang out together on multiple occasions for years on end. When we were around 7 or 8 years old, though, my mum let her have her first sleepover at my house. Everything was doing fine. That is, until the sun went down. So we wanted to stay up extra late that night, and so we snuck out of my room to play some more after my parents went to bed. After a while of sneaking around, we decided that we wanted to eat some cereal. I was going through a phase at the time too, where all I wanted to eat was Captain Crunch. And like lots of families, we had our main fridge in our kitchen and another in our basement. At the time, our basement was unfinished. It was huge, almost the size of our whole house in fact, with 3 concrete walls and one that was made of a huge grey brick. Our laundry room, if you could call it that, was in the top right corner, behind some wooden slat stairs with the gaps between them and against the brick wall. But the laundry room wasn't actually a laundry room. Just a corner with a washer or dryer, and the extra fridge on the square of carpet that we laid out so it was softer to stand on than the cold concrete floor when we did the laundry. I was naturally terrified of the basement as a kid as well, because the corner underneath our wooden stairs had just a single light bulb hanging freely over the laundry room. The brick wall, which was to the right of the laundry appliances, also had a huge brick missing up by the exposed ceiling, with all the creepy tubes and the pink fluffy insulation and all that stuff. There was also a crawl space on the other side of the brick wall. Nothing really interesting there, and I wasn't really ever allowed to see over it, but that didn't stop my child brain from imagining stuff on the other side. Obviously, I didn't go down there for my irrational fear of the creepy basement. So of course, we opened the main fridge upstairs and realized that we have no milk. My friend insists, though, that she has to have some cereal and that we should check the downstairs fridge. Immediately, I affirmed that there was no way I was going down there, especially because it was dark, late at night, and it was just the two of us. Somehow, though, she ended up convincing me, and soon we were creeping down the steps. Well, we had turned on the switch, but it was still so dark, since the only light was above the laundry corner. It was conveniently behind the staircase that we walked down in, lighting the way through the gaps on the steps. But once we got down there, I sort of felt braver than ever, I must admit. I got that childlike surge of adrenaline, I guess, and I thought that I was the toughest kid ever. I think my friend felt that same way too, because as soon as we turned around and got to the laundry corner, we started sizing up the room into a that wasn't so bad kind of way. I continue walking to the fridge on the far left to get some milk, and she keeps standing there. At some point between my walk from the start of the carpet to the fridge, she had seen an old pile of toys that we kept down in the bottom right corner, straight ahead from the top right corner that we were in. I just opened the fridge when I hear her start to scream. I quickly turn around and she's standing directly across from me. Her mouth is wide open, her eyes slightly raised up and shaking, and she's doing what looks like high knees in place as she flaps her arms around. Just pure fear. I scream because she is, and we're both up the stairs like darts. As soon as we get to the living room, she throws herself belly down on the floor and starts kicking like a mad woman. My parents come running, of course, and think that she's having a seizure on the floor or something. When they scoop her up, they realize that that's not the case. She just starts sobbing, too. They ask her what's wrong, what hurts. I'm just standing there staring at her with tears streaming down my face. I've never seen someone that terrified in my life to this day, not even in horror movies or anything. They couldn't get any response besides a hysterical, "There was a man with a hat, there was a man with a hat down there," until she finally calmed down to just crying. Mum actually came and picked her up, and my dad went searching around the basement for some man with a bat. I got a talking to for staying up past my bedtime, and that was pretty much that. I was put back in my room, but I slept with the lights on that night, and I didn't see her ever again after that. At least not until years and years later. And when I did talk to her, years later when she came up on my Facebook, I found out that she had been in and out of a mental hospital for years since. But I've had a specific experience in the same house that makes me feel like that she isn't so crazy, but that perhaps that thing made her crazy. We moved a few years after we had fully renovated the house, and I haven't been there since, but I did see this hat man myself. A fedora tipped down so you couldn't see his face, a long trench coat, and what looked like to be sort of like dog-like paws with long claws, which sounds really, really strange, I know. And just typing it out makes me think that, who knows, maybe I'm insane too. This is a story about a man named John that I met while working retail. John is an older white man in his mid-50s, well-dressed, well-spoken, shoulder-length steel grey hair and a low ponytail tied back. At the time, I was working at a farm and pet supply store. I was called over to help a customer look at electric fences and shock collars for dogs, which I am steadfastly against, but I had to help the customer. I asked him what I could help him with, and he said that he was interested in an electric fence for his dogs, since he had a cabin in the woods and wanted to make sure that they didn't get away. And he said, "Oh, yes, I'm looking to use this shock collar. Maybe on you?" Thoroughly creeped out, I tried to laugh it off and tell him no thank you. I finally got someone who knew more than I did, and I thought that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. The next time that he saw me, he said, "I've been looking for you. I bought what I wanted. It didn't know what you said. I wanted to slap you the next time that I saw you." I told him that if he ever did hit me, that I would absolutely hit him back. So then a few days later, he told me that he would really, really like to take me out to lunch one day, and I politely declined. He would come into the store and look for me. I'd see him before he saw me. And one day I saw him first. I hit him until I thought that he'd left, but no, he found me in the back of my department. He said, "Oh, just so you know, I'm not dressed up for you today. I have a meeting with the bank, but if I didn't, I'd be taking you out for lunch. You know, I can tell you dyed your hair. You look so beautiful, but that doesn't mean anything to you, does it? But you know what? It might mean something if you liked me back." He was never banned from the store, and even after one of my managers heard him say these things to me, but my co-workers would tell me when he was in the store and help me get away from him until he left. I haven't seen him since I quit, and I'm really thankful for that because, man, was he one weird dude. In 2017, I was walking my fiance's dog around our complex. It was pretty dark and creepy on a good night, but this time, it was just way more off than usual. Something just really didn't feel right to me, and I noticed a car slowly creeping down the way next to me. My gut dropped, and something in my head just said run, so I did this, and as I got out of sight, I saw the car crawl up to the area and pick up speed and drive off as if scanning for someone. Now, under normal circumstances, this would just be simple paranoia, but it was not a normal time. So I live in Tampa, and at that time our city was on edge because a new serial killer had popped up and had at this point already killed 4 people. His method seemed to be killing random people in the evening or early morning hours by shooting them. Even though they were all in one area, the police had that part of the city locked down, so many assumed that he'd either hold off or start in another area. Literally a few days after this happened too, the police, they actually got the guy, and it turns out that he lived right down the road from our apartment. I am glad that I trusted my gut that day because I'm pretty convinced that I would have been his 5th. This past year was mine and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do that much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the 2 of us were living in Seattle and wanted to rent a cabin in a snowy small town for the weekend. We found a cabin in Airbnb with a hot tub, and so we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a sort of small removed private road that ended in a roundabout, and off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to our cabin. So we got to the cabin though, and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, and you needed to take the stairs on the back side of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all of the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during the snowy season that we shouldn't be surprised if their contracted snowplowers showed up to clear off the driveway and whatnot. Okay, sounds good. We unpacked and we realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us that there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. And that weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and that night, I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food and a nice night out. And dinner was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne and hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlights shining in front, and asked if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks, but there they were. Immediately, though, we remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by. But the issue was, we saw the tire tracks because of the snow, and who plows in the dark anyway? We also knew that once we were at the cabin, we had no service on our cell phones or anything, so we figured that we would head back into town and message our Airbnb hosts and ask if them or one of their friends had stopped by to the apartments. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our hosts, but didn't hear back in the end. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10 and we didn't want to be bad guests. We figured that we blew the whole thing out of proportion anyway and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am big into true crime, spooky subreddits and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back though, and this time we actually drove up the driveway. But towards the top of the hill part of the driveway, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed down the driveway and I took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had drove up the driveway, reversed down, parked, and then got out of the car and walked onto the property. Since we had now also driven on the tracks though, we couldn't find where the footprints ended. The property was quite large with tons of trees and brush, and we knew instantly that these footprints could really go anywhere. But the moment that we saw the footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured that it was better to be safe than sorry, and we would just have the officer go onto the property with us to check everything out. So we drove down the road till we got service, called the police, and waited for their arrival. The policeman showed up and we allowed him onto the property. The police officer scanned the property and determined that there was no one out there. Obviously, we're a little shaken up and pretty embarrassed, but we thanked the officer as he left. Needless to say, though, neither of us wanted to sit in the hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. So instead, we locked the doors and we just watched a movie, champagneless. We were both tired from the day and we passed out pretty quickly, though. At 3 a.m., we both wake up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights, laughing about how the night didn't turn out as planned. And as my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we both heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze, though. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 in the morning, mind you. And like I said, we woke up to all of our lights on and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, that they knew that we were there and they could even see us. So I immediately grabbed the landline and I dialed 911. We sat crouched in the Airbnb, praying for the police to arrive quickly. We knew that whoever had made those tracks was still on the property, and this time they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang on our balcony as if someone threw something up onto it. I was losing my mind when the operator told me that the police were nearby now. And all of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search the property. Soon we heard banging on the door. It was the police, and we were okay. At the door were 2 policemen, one in front of us and one a little behind, kind of kicking around snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed the police officer in the back as the officer that did the initial check on the property. The police officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked, and again, there were no signs of someone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the police officer said that the road conditions were just too dangerous that time of night. I looked at the police officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt that I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, though, again locking all the doors and trying to go to sleep. The next day, thankfully, we were leaving, and while we did survive the night, I just didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever claimed the spooky cabin in my head, and I just wanted to leave. As we packed, we heard that same noise that we heard at 3 a.m., and it turned out that it was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage door trying to be opened. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and just walked away, as if I'm going to. But I think back on this story a lot, and am embarrassed about how little came out of it, but I'm also incredibly grateful for the same reason. And although there are some explanations for some of the noises, where those tracks came from and why someone came up so late at night along our driveway, we both still admit that we don't have those answers. So in the middle of quarantine, only Mum can leave the house to buy us some food. And yesterday morning at around 9 a.m, Mum said that she's going to go and get some food for lunch, and she said that she might be back home late, and then she left. I was watching TV while eating breakfast, and maybe about 30 minutes later, I would say, I saw Mum enter the house empty-handed. I tried talking to her, but she just didn't respond. She just continued walking until she enters her own bedroom, and I ignored it because I think that she's just changing her clothes or something. But at around 11 a.m, Mum just arrived, carrying some meat and vegetables that she bought from the markets, and I was really confused because, well, I remember her coming home before. I explained to her what happened, and she also has no idea because she never came home earlier. I let her enter her bedroom to see if there was anybody inside, but she didn't see anyone. There was no one in her bedroom, and also her bedroom stayed the same as after she had left the house, so we were pretty sure that it wasn't some random thief or something. This left her confused though, and she said that I was just having hallucinations, or maybe I should go see a psychiatrist or something, but I don't know. What do you guys think? So before I begin, I just want to clarify right now that I absolutely never led this kid on. Everyone who knew about it while it was happening will say the same as well. I'm not a flirty person by any means, and I was very careful not to say or do something to make this boy believe that I was into him. But anyway, so we're traveling back about 7 years, all the way back to when I was 14 years old. Makes me feel old as heck as well. I was at a high school sport event, and it was a Friday night game. I really can't remember if it was football or baseball, but all I know is that it was the last day of school before spring break. I wasn't super into school spirit. I was a bit of an emo kid and a loner for the most part. But my best friend pressured me into going, and I reluctantly agreed, and looking back, man, do I wish that I didn't. I've known her since I was like 4 though, so if anyone can convince my stubborn ass to do something, then it's 100% her. But for the sake of anonymity, we'll call stalker boy Zach and my guy friend Cody. So I had met Zach through my friend Cody. I probably spoke to him for like 3 minutes, honestly. It was more like an introduction maybe, and I didn't really vibe with the way that he stared at me, so I went back to my all-girlfriends and we just continued the night. After I got home, I received a text from Cody saying that Zach thought that I was pretty and wanted my phone number, so he gave it to him. I didn't really think too much about it. I mean, it's not that I wanted him to have my phone number, but I was super close with Cody and he was reliable, so he would never give my number to someone if he thought something was off with him. But I wake up the next day on a Saturday and everything's fine. Towards the afternoon, I receive a text saying, "Hey, it's Zach. I got your number from Cody." So we did some small talk basically. I didn't want to be a jerk, so I'd respond, mainly because he was friends with Cody, so I didn't want to be rude. After about 45 minutes of texting, he tells me that he's leaving for a cruise and was really upset that I wasn't coming with. So obviously I asked what he meant, and he said that he would miss me and hated to be away from me for a week. I definitely thought it was an extremely weird thing to say, but I figured that it was sarcasm or a joke, so I texted back saying something like, "LOL, we've spoken for less than an hour, I think you'll be just fine." And he was like, "Yeah, I guess." From my perspective, I had a lot going on in my life too. I was very anxious talking to people at the best of times. I was suffering from depression and daddy issues as well. I wasn't someone who could just be like, "You're weird, block number." I was a very shy kid and just didn't know what to do in this situation. So I'll admit that I let it go on longer than I probably should have, but I was 14 and didn't realize who I was dealing with, to be honest. But anyway, he's on the cruise, so I didn't hear from him for a week. Then eventually he gets off the boat and tells me that I'm the first person he wanted to text. He even said that he couldn't stop thinking about me and all the fun things that we would have been doing while on this trip. The rest is pretty fuzzy, but all I really remember is Zach kept saying weird stuff like how we'll get married in the future and how we're soulmates and how he's never been so in love with anyone, and he just became obsessed with me for some reason. If I didn't respond, he would text me every 5 minutes on the dot, asking if I was mad at him until I responded. It was just very obsessive behavior. I would tell him that I'm busy and he would get upset. He just needed to text me, constantly. One day, though, I basically told him that he was taking things too far and I was uncomfortable now. I said that I was sorry if I had somehow let him on, but I think of him just as a friend. He definitely didn't like that response by any means. He was making fake Instagrams to harass me, telling me that he's going to kill himself because I broke his heart, calling me a whore. My first kiss was at 18 and my first boyfriend at 19, so you do the math on whether I'm a whore or not. But he was just saying anything and everything to try and hurt me. I spent 6 hours apologizing while he was telling me that I'm a horrible person and I should just end it all. It was a really messed up conversation. And in the end, I just couldn't get Zach to leave me alone for months. After that, though, my friends had to sneak me around campus to avoid Zach. I would have to cut through buildings and take the long way just to steer clear from him. Eventually, though, after a few months, he stopped harassing me online, and I actually thought that I was free. Now flash forward to sophomore year. After months of being in chemistry class, I noticed my friend, his name was Max, had the same last name as Zach. It's a pretty uncommon last name as well, so it was a bit like a light bulb turned on in my brain, and I immediately asked if they were related, and he rolled his eyes and said, "Oh yeah." And I was like, wow. We ended up chatting, and apparently I'm not the only girl that Zach would harass. Max told me that he got sent to another school and was put into therapy for basically being crazy and aggressive. Zach, unfortunately, was extremely abusive towards Max. I was relieved that he was sent away after hearing that. Max was definitely more relieved that he was sent away as well, and it also made a lot of sense as to why the harassment just stopped so suddenly. Now we're entering junior year, though, and Max had informed me that his brother was enrolled back at our high school. Thankfully, I had a heads up, but nothing would prepare me for when I actually saw him face to face. So I walk into English class, and guess who's sitting in my classroom? Yep, it's Zach. The second that we made eye contact, too, he smiled the creepiest smile I've ever seen. I was quite honestly terrified as well. Thankfully, he never spoke to me or harassed me, but he did spend every class just sort of staring at me with that scary grin on his face. And as much as I wish that I was making this up, unfortunately, these are all true events that really affected me in high school. When my friend brought it up the other day, it honestly felt like a fever dream, like I just forgot that it was real. It was really hard spending 2 whole years of high school terrified of bumping into him, not knowing what he would do, especially after finding out everything that his brother Max went through, which I won't go into detail, but man, it was horrible. Thankfully, though, it's been years since I've had to deal with him again, and for that, I guess I should count my lucky stars. The Pacific Northwest is really a place of wonder, and where we believe creatures of law exist. There have been too many various sightings here to ignore them. I wouldn't say demonic in nature either, more like tangible beings. The skies are vast, the air is clean, and there's sort of a mystic feeling here, almost as if when you turn a corner you might see a fairy or something. And quite frankly, we never really want to live anywhere else. Now, I've been renting a farm-style house with my 2 grandchildren, my son and his fiancée, for almost 3 years now. We have a well under the back half of the house and a pump house behind us. There's around maybe 10 acres of land looking out towards Mount Rainier, and we have a 2-car garage connected to a big workshop, and next to us is the forest. Now, all things that I'll be describing have been spread out since we've lived here on this property, but sometimes we hear screams coming from this forest, and all the wildlife becomes really still and quiet. Occasionally we've listened to what also sounds like a metal chair scraping on concrete floor in the distance that echoes just over the whole land. I've talked to the young man and his brother who currently live on the same lot but closer to the forest, and they told me that they've definitely heard it too, but they stay in after dark because it just feels like they're being watched. In fact, they all think that there's something just off with this land. His brother also shared that he sees what he describes as a demon boy in his room and other places in the house. On one occasion as well, I asked him why he calls him a demon, to which he replied, because he scares me and he messes with my stuff. I really don't think it's a demon, but what he saw and what we saw in our house will be for another time to tell. As for the noise in the forest, I have compared these sounds to various wildlife indigenous to the area, but I haven't found anything yet. But anyway, this is what happened when we first moved here on this property that is surrounded by farms. So one late night, I was driving down the lonely road home and lit only by a handful of streetlights when I saw a flash of eyes in the distance. And not wanting to hit what I thought might be a deer, I ended up slowing down a bit. When I arrived at where I thought it was gone, but the side of the headlights shined on something sort of greyish-white, and I noticed something almost the size of a man sort of crawling into the bushes. I saw its back muscles and shoulder blades and its back leg. There was definitely no fur and no tail and no feathers or anything. It was just sort of a light-coloured muscular creature. I quickly turned the corner though, hoping to see it crawl out over the train tracks on the other side of the bushes, but when I did, it wasn't there. So, in the end, I just chalked it up to some strange creature and I went home. But I know what I saw, and my headlights definitely shined on it. I'll try to compile all that we've seen in the last 3 years too, because that will add some context. So we know that there's something going on with this land, definitely. My 2 adult children, my son's fiancée, and I have seen a tall white creature a few times. It stands about 7 feet tall with large eyes, and you often see it peeking around the workshop, revealing its head, chest, shoulder, arm with its hand on the wall and part of its foot, or it sort of peeks into the garage window, and we've seen this on many occasions. In fact, a few times from my son's window upstairs as well. My daughter was here for a visit once too, and she thought that she'd just dropped something earlier out back when she was playing with the kids in the yard. It was dark, so she and my son went out there and they both had flashlights to find whatever it was that she had dropped. They were searching for a while when they heard something rustle in the tall grass beyond them. She shined her light in the direction of the noise, and standing tall there in the field was that same creature. And man, did they both run quickly back to the house. She later moved out of state, and it's been over a year since this happened, so before I wrote this, I gave her a call. I didn't want to lead the conversation too, so I simply asked her what she remembered, and she described that thing to a T, and went on by telling me about the time that she saw it on the roof of the garage where both awnings meet. Apparently, she stepped out onto the front porch and something caught her eye over the garage. She said that she stepped closer to sort of get a better look at it, and apparently it tilted its head. My daughter then turned to tell her brother to look, and when she looked back, it was just gone. Then, of course, she had to ask me, "Don't you remember me telling you about this, and you thought that I was on drugs or something?" I do remember that, and I actually apologized. And while I don't think that these things have any sort of ill intent, or at least I don't hope so, it's still a very scary thing to experience, let me tell you. On an early evening, my son and his fiancée were leaving the garage from the side door, and my son locked eyes with this same thing crouched on all fours on a lawn couch outside my bedroom window. He said that it was white with sort of pasty skin and had a long neck and big round eyes that almost glowed. Its head stayed fixed on him and straight, but moved up and around clockwise and back like it was sort of sizing them up like an owl would almost. It was crouched with knees, and it was not an owl, that's for sure. But my son then started pushing his girl faster to the house. It was a while before he went back out there, never alone and never at night again, but just to let you know, we have never seen a raccoon or even a squirrel on this property, so it definitely wasn't anything like that. Plus, this thing is much bigger than anything like that. Another time as well, I was on my front porch one evening. I let the dogs out one last time before bed and noticed that they were all acting sort of skittish. They all did their thing though, and then they piled up in the front of the front door with crazy eyes as if they wanted in now. Thinking that it might be coyotes, I just let them in and went to the end of the porch to see what frightened them. I actually keep a light on above my back door and another one further down on another area on the back of the house. And something was tall enough to block out the light, casting its shadow on the wall of the garage. It couldn't have been a giant moth or anything on the light too, because the shadow was cast by both lights. And that gave me the real creeps to think that something was standing right outside my back door like that. My granddaughter keeps her window blinds shut after dark, even though there's nobody around. She said that she feels uneasy, and we're not living in fear by any means, but it's just different, you know. This hasn't been an everyday occurrence or anything like that, but it's enough to take notice, for sure. I have no explanation as to what it is. At first, I even just blew it off, thinking that it was just some sort of wildlife that we didn't know about before, but after seeing these things for almost 3 years now and getting validation from others as well, I know that there is so much more to this. Maybe someday before we move, though, and if I ever get my hands on some proper camera equipment with night vision and whatnot, I'll try and capture something and I'll share my findings with you guys. Anyway, thanks for listening, and hopefully nothing bad happens. This story happened when I was in college. There was just something about my early years in college too that just seemed to bring on a slew of experiences that range from creepy to terrifying. I don't know what it was about that time in my life, but this experience was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. So one night at the beginning of summer, following my freshman year of college, some of my high school friends and I were going to a party. We hadn't seen a ton of each other in the preceding years because of us all being away at college and whatnot, mostly just during school breaks and a few random weekends here and there, so we were all feeling kind of giddy at having the whole summer together. I wouldn't have normally gone to this party too, hosted by someone else that we went to high school with, but they all wanted to go and I wanted to hang out with them, so I ended up agreeing. And this was not the mistake that I made in this story either. That would come later this night. We got to the party and we realized that it was almost exclusively people from high school, which was kind of nice actually. It was like a sort of a big reunion almost. Soon my prior inhibitions were gone, and that was only partially because I started throwing back screwdrivers the moment that I got there. But a couple of hours later I was more than a little tipsy. No, I was definitely not full-on drunk, and for sure not fully plastered yet, which would prove to be my saving grace in this story in fact. After a while, a group of my friends decided to split off. The host of this party, Stephanie, lived in her parents' house still, and it was in the middle of nowhere basically near a forest. The forests at night both scare and enthrall me, so drunk me suggested that we go exploring. This is something that my friends would never let me live down, like, ever. But anyway, this group, Lauren, Hillary, Jared, Alex, Hugo, Dean, and the hostess Stephanie, plus myself obviously, decided to go into a midnight walk through the woods. It was pretty creepy, not gonna lie, but in a sort of cool way. At least I thought so. A couple of people in the group, namely Hillary and Alex, were pretty afraid, but Hillary went because her best friend was Lauren, and Alex had a thing for Hillary and Lauren as well, which was a whole thing in and of itself, and not the point of this story. But because they were both there, I thought that I should mention them. They kept making comments about how creeped out they were, and I just kept telling them to relax a bit. No one else is out here, I told them. Let's just enjoy this time together. Being drunk makes me weirdly sentimental. But we walked through the forest for a bit, and then we came into this clearing with a lake and a dock and tall grass and all that sort of stuff, plus a shed and what turned out to be a boathouse, I think, both of which had definitely seen better days. Now, Stephanie and I were definitely not exceedingly close, so this was my first time exploring this forest, but Dean and Hugo had been here before and remembered this place. They mentioned that they thought that Stephanie's parents forbade them from going back here because it wasn't their property, which was true. And it was like suddenly Stephanie realized where we were. I wasn't the only drunk one, okay? And her eyes got super wide, and she looked really nervous all of a sudden. Not scared exactly, but more like worried that we get in trouble. And she said that we should go back. I told her that everything was fine, since we can totally trust the judgment of a drunk person, and because everyone else was drunk, they all agreed with me, save for Steph, but she was outnumbered and not about to go back home alone. Even Hillary and Alex were okay with staying, and because logic is a friend to drunk people everywhere, I suggested that we play hide and seek, and mostly everyone agreed. Honestly too, I don't know why people kept listening to me. It was weird, but if I'd been sober, this was the kind of place that I would have been kind of freaked out about. In a cool way, sure, but not in a let's play hide and seek kind of way. And this is where things took a turn for the worse. So Hugo was forced to be it because we were terrible and told him that he didn't have a choice. So we went into the woods and he counted while we ran in to hide. I saw Dean dart into the shed, but everybody else ran into the woods. I decided to duck down in the tall grass, which varied in height. Sometimes I could kneel, and sometimes I had to be on my stomach to be totally concealed. But as I was hiding, I heard voices from the trees nearby, whispers like the speakers were trying not to be heard. I was curious, so I made my way towards the voices, first on my hands and knees, and then eventually army crawling as the grass got shorter. And I nearly crapped myself when I ran into Stephanie in the grass, who turned out to be doing the exact same thing as me. When we got closer, we realized that it was Lauren and Jared, and that was how Steph and I realized they liked each other. We were listening to them flirt and looking at each other hopefully, and I swear we had a telepathic conversation about how good they would be together, but that was when we heard someone barreling towards us through the grass. Heart pounding, I turned to see who it was, just as Hugo threw himself down next to Stephanie and me, and he looked terrified. "Hugo, what the heck, man?" I whisper-hissed, because there was no way that he counted as high as we were making him. We were being real jerks to Hugo that night. I feel sorry for him too, but he first looked around frantically, but then he told us what had him spooked. I will never forget this because of the sheer terror that I saw in Hugo's face that night, and I heard in his voice too. "Guys, there's something in the woods," he told us. Stephanie tried to tell him that it was probably somebody else from the party, but Hugo said no. He said that he'd seen the guy and hid behind a tree, and this guy seemed to be in his 40s. He said the guy looked rough too, and he just had a bad feeling, so he booked it. And in the end, it was just sort of happen chance that he found Stephanie and me in the grass like that. "Listen, he's looking for something, or someone," Hugo said, telling us that the guy was shining a flashlight around. And as if on cue, someone came walking out of the woods, and then he called out, "Hey Jim, you out there?" He sounded kind of angry, and now I felt stone cold sober. This wasn't right, and it was about to get a lot worse because that was when we saw the shadow of someone rowing a boat down the lake toward the dock. The first guy walked onto the dock to meet this guy, Jim presumably, and I heard him demand, "Where is he?" The first guy sounded angry, like he was expecting another person to be there too, and the second guy, Jim, informed the first, "Listen men, I screwed up." They proceeded to argue, though I couldn't hear what they were saying, and then they went into the boathouse. I was pretty sure that nobody had hidden in there, but I was worried about that, plus the fact that two shifty guys were doing what seemed to be pretty shifty things. We needed to get out of there, in other words. I knew that. But Dean was unfortunately still in the shed, which was too close to the boathouse for comfort given the situation. Lauren and Jared were now making out and totally oblivious to the whole thing, and Hillary and Alex were who knows where. Why had I suggested hide and seek in the first place? I'll never know. But that was what I kept asking myself while I tried to formulate a plan. Then we heard someone running through the woods, but like they were trying to do so quietly, and I turned to see Hillary. It looked like she was trying to find somewhere else to hide, unaware of what was happening, and I saw her run towards the boathouse. And it was like time stopped, and I didn't know what to do, or how to stop her, or what to say. Honestly, I just froze, but then Hillary hesitated when she got to the door. She would later tell us that the voices she heard inside gave her a pause to think. Thank God. And then the door swung open. It was honestly like something out of a movie, too. Hillary was now hiding behind the open door, and the first guy stood in the doorway looking around. Looking back, I think he must have heard Hillary, who was not being nearly as quiet as she thought that she was. If he closed that door from the outside, then he would definitely see Hillary, and then we would all be truly screwed. Luckily, he went back inside, though, and thankfully he closed the door as well. We had to get the heck out of there, though, but we still had to get Dean somehow, Lauren and Jared as well, and find Alex. We didn't have a lot of time. I didn't think anyway, so we had to be quick. And then, suddenly, Hugo stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed out a caw. He apparently thought that we were in a movie, and I just looked at him with a what the heck Hugo expression on my face. It was not what I would have done, but I'll be damned. It actually worked. Hillary came sprinting towards us, as did Alex, who had been hiding behind the boathouse the whole time. Likewise, Dean emerged from the shed, and Lauren and Jared detached themselves from each other. But alas, the two men in the boathouse heard us too and came busting out. But by that point, we were all sprinting away. I swear that I've never before nor since run as quickly, and at one point Stephanie tripped and I practically ripped her arm out of her socket while pulling her to her feet. Sorry, Steph. The guys chased us for a bit at least, though I don't know how long because we just kept running until we got back to Stephanie's house. The party was still going and the men hadn't followed us beyond the woods, but we were too freaked out to stay. I called my brother who came to pick us up and we all left. Even Stephanie, who left the house unattended save for the drunk partygoers, ended up going as well. We spent the night at my brother's house that night, and then we went back to Steph's house to clean up the next day because, honestly, this experience kind of bonded us in a weird way. Lauren and Jared are actually married now. Hillary and Alex were both in the wedding. Alex even briefly mentioned this incident in his speech. I lived with Dean for a bit following college, and Hugo is one of my best friends now, as is Stephanie, which is weird because we weren't really friends before that. But I swear that we thought that we were honestly going to die that night, all of us, except maybe Lauren and Jared. Even Dean heard what was happening outside the shed and was waiting for the right time to make his escape. And you can't really go through something like that and not come out closer. It's strange too, but also kind of nice. Like, we have this shared history, which was true before this because of going to school together, but it's just different now. I did want to go back to investigate in the light of day as well, but only Dean wanted to go with me, and I thought that maybe that wasn't enough people if we ran into trouble. I was still pretty spooked, though intrigued. Stephanie told us later, though, that she had told her dad when her parents got home later that day, and he and a few of his friends went back there and didn't find anything out of the ordinary, and they moved shortly after, but not because of this. So we never actually found out exactly what happened there. But we've also never forgotten it. In conclusion, though, like I said, I really don't know what happened that night. whatever those guys were up to, it was definitely no good. And the fact that they chased us through the forest like that, without yelling at us or trying to capture our attention or something, says to me that they were trying to capture us quietly. So about a year ago, I moved into a new apartment. It was my second year living alone. The city was relatively small, and I go to the local university there. And one night, I was just bored at home and decided to set up a Tinder date. I was talking to this apparent normal guy, and he asked if he could come over to my place. At the time, I didn't see anything wrong with that, so I invited him and said that I lived alone. About 20 minutes after the message, he arrives at my apartment, wearing a black hoodie, big earphones, and he asked if there were security cameras in the hallways, which was weird. I said that there were a couple though, and from that I could feel that I may have just made a bad mistake. He got into my apartment though, and we made out for like 10 minutes in bed. Then he asked if he could try some of his kinks on me. At that moment, I wasn't thinking rationally anymore, and I said, sure. And he started biting my neck, and my chest, and my legs, and then he started with some really weird stuff. He started pinching me really hard in the between me down there part, pulling my skin and just really digging his nails into my body. At this time, I was completely panicking and was asking him to stop, but he wouldn't. And then to top things off, he started choking me and I couldn't get him off of me because he was like this huge buff dude. At last, though, he stopped and I rushed into the bathroom saying that I needed to pee. In no time as well, I grabbed a knife, locked myself in the bathroom and called my other friends to come and help me. I got out and told him to get out of my apartment or I would call the police. And to my surprise, he actually tried to attack me, but I had a knife in my hand and I started screaming. After hearing my doorbell, he quickly got dressed and he just rushed down the stairs. I guess the moral of this story is to please be careful when bringing strange people to your home. This scared me for life, and I never, ever will be going on another Tinder date again. So this happened a few months ago. A new guy joined my boarding school, and he was this skinny dude that, even though he seemed a little bit off, he was extremely nice. But anyway, we immediately hit it off quite well since we had pretty similar music taste. He was a little bit weird, but overall, a charming normal dude. He wouldn't get along with most people though, so I felt some sort of responsibility, I guess you could say, to make him feel welcome and at home. I would help him out with cigarettes when he needed any, and generally I was just very kind to him. Now, one time I arranged to meet up with him and with my girl outside of my boarding school since we would get the weekend off. And so we met in the central city of where I lived and decided to just get some drinks and sit at a park. It was getting late and the conversation was flowing and everyone was having fun. He kept being his weird but fun self until, well, he just sort of snapped. I know for a fact that he wasn't drunk since we were drinking beers and he only had one, but he suddenly just had this crazy look and kept holding onto my girl really hard. I could see she started to panic, so I just pushed him off. He calmed down for a second, and then he picked something up from the floor and tried to shove it into her mouth. At that point, I charged at him at full speed and threw him to the ground. I held my fist up, and he immediately started to apologize, but he would only say, "I'm sorry," over and over again. Once I got up, he immediately tried to charge towards her as if I didn't just tackle him down. I stopped him again before he could touch her and threw him on the ground again. I gave him a few punches, but eventually I stopped. Something about his expression just really scared me. He had this look like he just wasn't even there. It was like he had one goal, which I didn't want to find out. I put him in a headlock and got him far away from my girl and where we were sitting. I then pushed him as hard as I could and went to my girl and we left. He kept trying to follow us for a while until I went up to him. He still had this weird sort of hollow look on his face though. I tried getting him to leave until finally I told him, "Look man, we forgot something back in the park. Can you go bring it?" Somehow that dumb idea worked. He started walking back, but the second that he was out of sight, me and my girl just ran for it and took the first bus home. But that's not all, because he texted me a couple of times since that happened, and some of those text messages were real strange. If there's any interest, I'll potentially post an update explaining what happened and upload some screenshots. But for now, I don't know what the heck happened that night. I don't know why he acted like that. It just all sort of was out of the blue, but I'm not really friends with him anymore, so I guess it won't happen again. Hopefully. To start off, I just want to make it clear that I have had several paranormal things happen in my life. Enough times, too, that I'm now a believer in the fact that there is another realm or world or whatever you may call it. My husband, however, has never had anything happen to him and has never been a believer. He's always told me, I believe that you believe you thought you saw that, or I believe that you believe that happened. And my response has always been, well, you'll believe it when you see it, because someday you're going to. So, here we are. His day has come. We were in the kitchen making dinner last night. He's at the stove. My back is towards him because I'm just chopping the veggies up. I turn around to hand them to him, and I see him running to the living room, searching around the corner. And then he returns with this wide-eyed and confused look on his face. I ask him what's wrong, and he says, I just saw someone cross through the hallway and into the living room. First, I try to find a logical explanation. Maybe you saw someone walk past the outside window or something like that. He looks at me, though, and says, no, I'm telling you that I saw a woman in here walk through to the living room just then. He also said that the woman had on jeans and a plaid shirt. We realized today that yesterday was actually the first-year anniversary of his cousin's death. She was only 29 and died of an overdose, and she always wore jeans and plaid button-ups. Before I start this, I just want to say that I am not afraid of the dark. I've been spelunking and turned off the lights in a pitch-black cave. I've been camping in the woods during new moons. I've slept alone at relatives' houses before. The only place that I've ever felt truly terrified in the darkness is my family home, in a town just on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. I'm going to give the most prevalent examples of why, but this is going to be pretty long, so strap in. So when I was about 6 years old, I had plenty of stuffed animals. I was unafraid of the dark back then, so I didn't have any light or something like that. But I would often wake up and find that the toy that I had brought with me to bed was just gone, and I would find it in a completely separate area of the house. From this point, I assumed that I must have been sleepwalking. It was such a regular occurrence, in fact, that neither I nor my parents thought much of it. The only thing odd was that I always ended up back in my bed, while whatever I was holding was in another room. But this all changed when I was around 8 years old. This time when I woke up, I was always in a very uncomfortable position and in an unfamiliar area. I quickly panicked as I could see almost nothing since the room was so dark. I felt in front of me, and it only took me a few seconds to realize that I had woken up inside of my very small closet, and the closet door was closed, sealing me in there. I opened the closet door, left my room, and I told my parents. We had a bit of a laugh about it because it was weird, sure, but as I said before, we all just assumed that I was just sleepwalking. The next experience I had to have happened only within a week or so of the last one. But I woke up late at night and immediately felt just really cold. It was like my hairs were standing on end for no particular reason. I felt a strong surge to leave the room as quickly as I could. Since the room was so dark, there was only one thing to guide me to my door. Outside of my room is a hallway leading to my sister's room and branches to a bathroom. The light was on in the bathroom, and so, because of the colour of the wallpaper, the light coming from under the crack under my door was a sort of pale green colour. As always, I followed the green light to what I thought was my door, but I couldn't find the handle. I felt scared, and I was getting frantic, searching the whole wall for a handle, and the darkness seemed to press down on me. And then I heard my name whispered behind me. I felt the wall next to me for my light switch, but it wasn't there either. So I began screaming, and I banged on everything that I could touch, still seeing that pale green light under the door in front of me. About 20 seconds later, my lights turned on, and my parents entered the room behind me. I wasn't even close to the door, even though I could clearly see the light. I was on the opposite wall from the door. Suffice it to say, this was the time that I decided that I needed to get a nightlight. And then, the next experience, and this one is the most frightening in my opinion. So I was around 14 years old. I still slept with a nightlight, but then it was broken for some reason, and we needed a new bulb to replace the dead one or something. Which, in my head at the time, was no problem. I could go one night without a nightlight after all. In the end, I just kept my door open as well, and the bathroom light in the hallway was enough for me to see. And that was really the only reason why I was able to see what I did. I should say, too, that I'm a very paranoid person by nature. I kept a knife under my pillow for the longest time, and even a flashlight under the pillow next to me. And when I slept that night, I had the distinct impression that I was being watched. To cope, I would close my eyes and count in my head for a few seconds, no more than 2 or 3, before opening them again to check the area around me. Keep in mind, this did not work. If anything, it kept me awake longer because of fear. This time, though, I got brave. I closed my eyes and I counted 1, 2, 3, all the way to 7, and on 7, I heard a sound. You know the sound of soft footsteps on carpet? Well, I heard that, and so I opened my eyes, and to my horror, I saw a thing crawl from the ground and onto my wall and crawl towards me. I couldn't tell what gender it looked like, only that it had long black hair and yellow eyes with a thin frame and pale skin. It also appeared to be wearing something on its back, like a rug or a pelt or something. I also noticed just a terrible smell in the air, like the smell of rot. I watched it for all of about 2 seconds while I quickly reached for the flashlight. I looked down at the flashlight to find the damn button, and when I turned it on, that thing was gone. Only my mother and I know this story because I've never really told anyone. Growing up a devout Catholic, my initial impression was that a demon had entered my home. I had a seminarian friend who was a collector of relics. Earlier, I had actually touched a small metal cross that I owned to these relics, including a splinter thought to be one from the wood of Christ's cross. This effectively made my small metal cross what is called a third-degree relic. We had the house blessed, and I took to sleeping with that cross under the pillow. Since then, I've never been approached by whatever that thing was again, so honestly, I thought it was over. The next one has happened 4 times after that last experience. So in one part of my house, like a playroom or sort of an office area, we have one of those pull-out couches that transforms into a really crappy bed. When we have company, like relatives stay the night, they sleep in my bed and often I sleep in that one. And every single time that I've slept there, I have seen it again. Due to the layout of this room, it's impossible to cover the entire room in light without just leaving the ceiling lights on. Thus, my nightlight couldn't reach a particular dark corner of said room. When I closed my eyes on these 4 separate occasions, I could hear like ragged breathing or something in the room with me. When I looked around, all I could see was the outline of a sort of dark shape huddled in that corner, rocking back and forth on its heels. I was terrified, obviously, but also confident. I still had my cross under my pillow after all, so I knew that I was safe. Fast forward to now, and I'm back from college because of COVID-19, and I'm staying with my parents. And the first thing that I did was place that same cross under my pillow. I just had to be sure, but yesterday, I made a mistake. And man, am I stupid. for some reason, I was watching YouTube videos about ghost stories, and I guess that I felt invincible. And I made fun of the thing, who clearly had not left when I had, as I still heard whispers in the dark, and I challenged it. Nothing happened that night, but today, though, I was taking my sheets off to wash them when I noticed that it was gone. My relic, that is. The only thing that I believe has kept me safe all this time. It happened when I turned my lights off, and when I came back, it was just gone. I'm worried about what happens now, because clearly this isn't over. I'm wondering, too, if anyone knows what this thing might be. If I knew what it was, I might be able to learn how to deal with it. It definitely doesn't cause the telltale ghost signs like flickering lights and static and all that sort of stuff. It only moves in the shadows. Plus, a priest blessed this house, and it was able to move my cross, so I don't know. Maybe it's not a demon? Until I challenged it too, it never seemed malicious, only sort of scary. Now I'm really not so sure anymore. I think that I'll be sleeping with the lights on tonight. I'll be sure to update if anything happens. Do any of you guys remember outdoor ed? If you don't remember, or just plain don't know, I'll give you a brief rundown. So, outdoor education, or ED for short, is a school camping trip that takes students to the woods where they can learn more about the outdoors. And my outdoor ed trip took me to the snow-infested mountains, and for the most part it was completely boring, save for the occasional snowball fight. But then, the last night occurred. I'll never forget the last night for as long as I live. Now, before that night, I didn't have any trouble sleeping, but the last night it was like something was just wrong. At first, I assumed it was just sort of homesickness, first time away from my parents. But then I looked at my cabin mates and counselor, and from the look on their faces too, I could tell that they were feeling it as well. It was a sort of tense several minutes, and then something started calling our names. It was barely more than a whisper, but all of us definitely heard it. The voice was sort of seductive in a way, alluring, and it made me want to go outside. But the small amount of common sense that I had back then just made me stay put. My counselor didn't feel the same way, though, and left the cabin to investigate. We could hear him yelling from outside, things like, "Come on guys, this isn't funny, the kids are trying to sleep." I guess that he assumed that it was some sort of a prank. After a few minutes of silence, he rushed back inside, and he said, "Hey guys, there's something or someone out here. Stay here, alright?" He says this, and then he grabs something from his bag and goes back outside. He yells out, "Listen, this is your only warning. I have a gun, and if you intend to hurt these kids, I will shoot." There's silence for some time, and then 2 gunshots. I swear it was the loudest noise that I'd ever heard. I could hear the other counselors come outside, and I hear them talk. I can't hear what they say, but my counselor comes back and says that the rest of the night that we have to stay indoors. Eventually, sleep won out, and I drifted off, but the next morning as the students are boarding the buses to leave, we see police cars on the road and police officers talking to my counselor. Not too long after, my dad shows me the news, and I found out what my counselor saw. He described it as something barely resembling a human, taller than 10 feet and with skin so pale that you would mistake it for snow almost. That was all that he could see before he fired his gun and the creature just ran off. It was on the news because apparently some local called the gunshots in because they heard them. And I really can't imagine just how awkward it was for my camp counselor to try and explain this to police officers, but suffice it to say, I had some nightmares about it, and now I'm forbidden from going on any more camping trips after it. Now that I'm older, though, and a little bit wiser, my best guess is that maybe it was a Wendigo. But this was in Southern California, and it's apparently an unusual place for such a creature. I don't know. It was a weird night, and like I said, it's definitely something that I won't forget. So this all happened a few years ago when I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, somewhere in that age range anyway. As the story is sort of old as well, some parts are filled in with the best that I can remember, but not all of it is exactly as it happened. So I grew up in a medium-sized town where most people knew each other, but it was also a popular place for tourists to visit basically any time of the year. My friend, female, and I, female, had been out at the park for a few hours as the weather was nice. It might be important to mention too that we were both in shorts and t-shirts as it was far too hot for anything else. My friend, Katie, had suggested that we should go slightly out of town to go to one of our mutual friends' houses. I had never been to this friend's house before, and so I didn't really know where it was or how to get to it, but Katie said that she did. So we started heading up to the house, only to realize that we don't actually know how to get there. But Katie knew the name of the street, so we decided the best point of action at this point is to ask someone for directions, as we were pretty much completely lost. But as we had been out all day and had been walking around for a while, it was getting later in the day and not many people were around. We wandered around before eventually finding somebody to ask. He was a guy, maybe in his late middle age, bald, and he had a stubble beard, and besides that, he was pretty average. Well, we go and ask him if he knew where the street was, and he gives us some really convoluted explanation for directions, and even with a map, I've always really struggled with visualizing directions. And after a couple of seconds of listening to his help, I was completely lost. Once he's done talking, though, we just thank him and start walking off in the direction that he pointed us in, just to avoid awkward silence. Eventually, we stop and look at each other, both confused and tired. Neither of us knew what he said or where to go at this point, and so we decide to just try and get back to town so I can get us back to my house, giving up on the surprise visit. We turn around and start heading back the direction the guy was, but then we see him again walking our way. I smile awkwardly at him and we cross the road to avoid him, as Katie and I don't really know how to interact with people, and I have anxiety, so seeing the dude again really sets off some alarms in my dumb mind. But as you could probably guess by now, this guy crosses the road too. We try to ignore him and keep going back in the direction of my town, but being two small young teens, the guy catches up to us and starts trying to talk to us. I was raised to be polite, but was also told many stories of kids being kidnapped and worse stuff by my mother, so I'm panicking a bit, but trying to talk back and answer some of his questions as to not annoy him. Katie is staring at me like I'm crazy the whole time, and eventually he grabs my arm and Katie's shoulder, and immediately I'm on the verge of tears thinking that I'm for sure going to get kidnapped. He tells us that he's sure that we're going the wrong way and says that his car is just up the street and he could drive us up there if we wanted to. Katie speaks up and says that we're actually just going to head back home and that it's just around the corner, pointing down the street at one of the houses. The guy lets go of us instantly, looking up at the house and falling silent. Katie grabs me and we walk to the house. And once we get to the door, we hesitate at the doorstep. I look over my shoulder, seeing the guy is gone. Once I knew that he was not hiding behind a corner or something, though, I start crying a lot, and we go back to my house without any other issues. When we got back, my parents called Katie's parents, and they talked about the situation before coming to get Katie. I try to describe the guy to my mum, as she knows most of the people in town, as she worked in a popular but small shop. But we ended up being pretty sure that he must have just been a tourist. So, I've had 3 whole months of experiencing creepy stuff when I moved to the province about 4 or 5 years ago. This story would just be way too long if I shared everything, so I wanted to start with this specific topic first. So I had just graduated from college this time. I visited my best friend Erin, who was just 2 hours away via Ro-Ro ship for her son's birthday. And the funny thing is, a big family fight happened. We got kicked out, and we ended up staying at some hotel while searching for an apartment. We found a house near the beach, and immediately we rented it. It was a quiet village, and the house was maybe 5 minutes away from the village gate, but located at the very back. We were staying on the second floor. The first floor was sort of an open space for parking and had a garden and whatnot. There were stairs outside that you'd have to take to go up into the house, and I noticed each time that I entered the village, I would smell a sort of scent similar to frangipani flower. It was sweet and delicate, but felt like it was always right under my nose. What surprises me, though, is that I've never seen that tree around this village. I didn't mind it so much, though, until my best friend started bringing it up, saying how it sort of disturbed her. The weird part, though, was that even at work, I eventually found work to help with the expenses, a few people would mention my perfume, even when I don't use one. So one day, I was lying on bed getting ready to sleep when Erin's 10-year-old sister, Anna, approached me with a frightened look on her face. There's someone knocking on the balcony door. What? Is someone stuck outside? No, but I'm scared. I'm a little peeved, confused, but also concerned. So I get my butt up and I go to the balcony door, and I immediately start smelling that floral scent again. Now, our balcony door from the inside was a sort of wooden door, then on the outside a screen door. I start assuming that maybe Erin is stuck outside, so I yell through the door, "Hey Erin, is that you? Are you stuck outside?" I hear my best friend's voice from the bathroom saying that she's just taking a shower. Right after, I hear 3 knocks from the door, though. Anna starts hiding behind my back, and I'm pretty creeped out myself, I must admit. Then I start yelling, "Who's out there?" And another 3 knocks on the door. I'm proper peeved at this point that nobody is answering, and I start to yell that it's not funny. Then whoever or whatever is outside starts knocking frantically on the door. Me and Anna scream and are freaking out. We ran to the bathroom to tell Erin that somebody is knocking outside. Now, you may think that we're overreacting, but the balcony has no tree strong enough for someone to climb up, nor are the trees anywhere near enough to get close to it. We also have a tall gate with tall walls surrounding the place, so the fact that anybody could be there was really strange. Erin, though, eventually steps out of the shower, sopping wet, mind you, and very annoyed. We tell her what happens, and she looks at us like we're the dumbest people alive. She proceeds to the door and asks who's there. And then the knocking happens again. Midway through the knocking, though, Erin unlocks and opens the door impressively quickly. But then we realize that the screen door, after the wooden door that is locked from the inside, making us wonder how the heck someone could knock on the wooden door in the first place. We open the screen to further check, and when we do, there's just nobody out there. Unsatisfied with this, I quickly ran downstairs to check for anyone. Maybe someone jumped off at the last minute or something, or is trying to escape. But analysing the place, I tried to convince myself that there's some sick person trying to pull a prank, but there was no one. I go up and I tell Erin that there's nobody there. I slowly retreat to my room where Erin's 2-year-old son is playing with some toys. And then he looks at me and, dead in the eyes, he says, "You let it in." I don't know if he heard what was going on or if it was just coincidental, but the whole situation, it's really creeping me out. In October of 2018, I moved in with my girlfriend for the first time ever. Her name was Jane, and if I knew everything that was going to happen in the next 5 months that would follow, I really never would have. So the night that everything started is pretty important, and I'll come back to this day later in the story as well. One night, my now ex-girlfriend's mother and brother stayed over. I was feeling well, so I relaxed in our bedroom while they hung out on the porch very late into the night, and at one point, Jane came in and asked me if I needed anything, and checked up on me just to see if I was doing alright. A little while after that, I'm in bed alone with my eyes closed, and I swear to you that I felt a hand on my arm and I opened my eyes, and Jane was kneeling next to our bed, touching me, and asked if I needed anything again. She had a really condescending look on her face, which initially just annoyed me, and I replied that I was fine, and I closed my eyes again, hoping that she would just let me rest. A minute later, I opened my eyes again because I didn't hear her leave the room or open the door to leave. But she was gone. I looked next to the bed because I was thinking, is this crazy chick laying on the floor or something? She wasn't. I looked at the door and I saw the hallway light coming from underneath it. Now, I was never asleep, and I was questioning how I never saw the light shine in when she came in the room or heard it or something. I went to text her to see if she had just come in the room again, but then decided against it. I didn't ask at this point because I didn't want to seem crazy to her family that was over, and I honestly knew right there and then that she never came into the room. I do remember a few nights after that just sort of laying in bed with her and feeling a hand touch my thigh, and I felt the fingers drag away. She was asleep though, but I guess it could have been her. I told her about that first night eventually, and we both just agreed that it was really weird and then just sort of brushed it off. About a week after that first incident though, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw what I can only describe as a black sphere just floating in the corner of the room near the ceiling. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and at this point I'm wide awake, and it's definitely still there. It started to move towards me across the room. It got about a foot from my face, and I just sort of stared at it. And what I saw were facial features. More lion-like than human, but I remember big teeth, and what instantly stood out to me was that this face looked very condescending again. I felt like whatever this was wanted me to know that it was the same thing that I crossed paths with maybe a week prior. Eventually it just dissipated, and I told Jane about things that were happening. She never thought that I was lying, but I'll admit that there were times that I seriously started to question myself. That is, until things started happening to other people around me too. But I'll get into that soon. So one day I went out onto our back porch to have a smoke, and when I stepped outside, the porch light dimmed a little way down. I thought that somebody had turned a machine on in the house or something, and I went to tighten the bulb, but there was a glass fixture around it that was screwed in, and I just decided that I didn't feel like getting a screwdriver, and a minute or so later it came back on full strength anyways. This porch as well can't be accessed from anywhere but inside the apartment. It's screened in and there's no door from the outside. The next day I get home from work and I went to the porch, and the glass fixture that was screwed in tightly just the night before was smashed to absolute oblivion. And I don't mean just below where it was, I mean it was smashed all across the porch. And this was really weird too because, well, it was a nice day. There was no breeze, and I just couldn't come up with an explanation as to how it happened. Jane once saw a water bottle get smacked off the dresser when I was in the bathroom once as well. And one night I woke up because it sounded like someone was throwing pebbles from across the room and they were hitting the headboard. I sat up several times looking around. I'd lay down and it would start again. I thought that I started to hear whispering from across the room, and then it grew louder and louder, and I sat up and it began to be loud enough to make out that it was a man's voice and it wasn't speaking English. And this is when I got really scared for the first time, I think. I went to wake up Jane, but I couldn't move. I sat there frozen and the voice got overwhelming. And it was honestly like I just had to take it, and it just had power stronger than mine. Finally, my joints started to work again though, and I was drenched in sweat. I was also so drained that I just fell asleep, like almost passed out. And in the end, I didn't even bother telling Jane because, oh, I don't know, maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I want to mention too that as things got wilder in the apartment, my relationship with Jane became more toxic. I had feelings of anger that I never felt before. Our fights were just out of control. I'd never reached this point in any relationship before this. But when we would make up and be hugging it out and crying and all that, almost like clockwork, stuff would get smashed in the house. Dishes, lamps, you name it. And I'm positive that whatever that we were dealing with did not want anything good between her and I. One time as well, I woke up in the middle of the night to me feeling pressure on the mattress next to me. I woke up and I looked to see an old man with a top hat sitting there just staring at me. I jumped up and yelled, and he casually stood up and put his coat on that he had laying across his lap. He walked out of the room and just left. Well, I jumped out of bed, ran out of the door and took a left, and I was shocked to see him again walking across my living room. I ran up behind him to swing at this guy, and he just disappeared when I got near him. After this, I didn't know whether I was going crazy or what, but I called paranormal investigators to set a date for mid-February. I had a cruise to go with my friend in January, and Jane was not happy about it, especially with our relationship where it was at. She didn't stay there when I was away, though, and the morning before the trip, I was up early packing in the spare room. Jane was asleep in bed, and all of a sudden it sounded like an avalanche was happening from our bedroom. Jane screamed my name loudly, and as I ran across the living room to get to the bedroom, I noticed what seemed just like a wave energy, I suppose. It's hard to describe, but it started at our bedroom where the commotion was and was moving away from it. It literally knocked the wind out of me, and I saw or heard something knocking into everything into the room as it moved. She was petrified and in tears. A lamp was broken, and I don't know why, but this was the incident that scared me the most. I think it's because I was so awake and alert, and it was at night as well, and somebody else was there to witness it. So it had all the confirmation that I needed to know that I don't think I was going crazy. But then came the cruise. So this was almost a normal week, and one night I woke up to my friend that I was bunking with standing next to my bed. Initially I freaked out, and when I did, he woke up from his actual bed. So in other words, he was not the one actually standing there. My friend says that when he first woke up, he saw a black shadow figure standing next to my bed. Obviously, I saw him and not a shadow figure, so we were seeing two different things, but we both saw this thing just disappear into nothing. Oddly enough, too, this was the last thing that ever happened to me. It's been over a year since then, and I got back, and after a month of no activity, I ended up just cancelling the investigators. One last note, though, that makes this really interesting as well. After this was all over, I visited this girl that I know who was sensitive to these things. Her name was Sarah, and remember how the night that started it all, when Jane's family was visiting? Well, I didn't even mention that detail to Sarah. But earlier that first night, I went to Jane's mum and stepdad's house for the first time ever to meet them and have dinner and whatnot. It wasn't a fairy tale meet by any means, but the night started pretty good. Her stepdad got really drunk and eventually got mean towards Jane as well. Him and I ended up fighting, and the mum and the brother came and stayed with us. And Sarah had asked me if my girlfriend's father was an addict after I told her about the haunting. This was a really out-of-the-blue question, but I said yes, that he's an alcoholic and a drug addict. And Sarah said that this must have all come from him when we crossed paths. His energy had allegedly stuck with me, and he's a nasty, abusive addict, so it all kind of just made sense to me in the end. Anyways, Jane and I didn't work out in the end, and we're on good terms and talk occasionally. I can truly say that these were the darkest times mentally of my life for sure, and I definitely have a different perspective on the universe than I did before it all happened. I'm just really glad, though, that it's all over now. So my first job was at a McDonald's. This building was attached to a gas station and located off of a busy highway. I was 14, all kinds of bad luck at this stage, and started a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. This early in the morning, the store was usually empty, so only 3 people, myself included, were in the restaurant. the manager who was in the back, the cook who was also in the back, and I, the cashier, who was up front. So I was wiping down the counter when a man who looked to be in his mid-30s or early 40s came in. He didn't order anything, but went straight to the restrooms, which were in the restaurant area just around the corner from my cash. Many truckers and travellers would come in simply to use the washrooms and leave, so this wasn't too uncommon. I didn't think much of it, in fact. But after the man finished, he came up to the counter and said, "Hey, excuse me, I was just in the washroom and one of the toilets is overflowing." I immediately came around the corner and let him lead me towards the restroom, but suddenly I just got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and stopped dead in my tracks. I became very aware that no one was actually in the restaurant area, and the only other two people in the store were in the back that would not be able to hear me if I went into the restroom. The man had the restroom door open and realized that I had paused. He nonchalantly said, "Come on in, I'll show you," which came off innocently enough, but just didn't sit well with me. I smiled and said, "One moment, I'll just go and get my manager, okay?" And I started making my way back to the counter. "It'll only take a minute," he called out. I met my manager in the back and explained to him that a man was complaining about an overflowing toilet. My manager went to check it out, and I followed closely behind him. But when we turned the corner, the man was gone, and we entered the restroom anyway, but there was no toilet overflowing. We exchanged a look, and we never really brought it up again. But to this day, I feel like some divine intervention gave me the wisdom to know not to follow the man into the restroom. The whole situation only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like much longer than that. I was young and trusting, and this man could have done who knows what, and I would never have been hurt. In fact, he could have left, got away with whatever he had planned, and just hit the highway. Also, I never did see him again. So when I was 7 years old, I went to a small school in our little oilfield town in Alberta. And there was this guy named Daniel there too, and I don't know if that's his real name, but when I think of him, my mind defaults to that for some reason, so we'll just go with that. And well, Daniel had slept with my mum ages before I was even conceived, and somehow had in his brain that I was his child, a full-blown delusion. So Daniel decided the smart and rational thing to do was to stalk me, like hardcore. He apparently plotted out a map to my school, he knew my name, he knew how old I was, and he knew what I looked like. And to be honest, I have no idea how he even got this information. My mum never really used Facebook, and he lived in a completely different province. I had never met this man before, but Daniel decided that one day he wanted to take it a step further. He had been ranting to his wife about me and kept telling her that I was his kid and that he was going to drive from British Columbia all the way to Alberta to come and kidnap me and bring me back to BC with him. He was convinced that I was conceived earlier than I was, and I was his kid, and my mum made some conspiracy to hide the fact that I was his kid. He had a whole plan for how to kidnap me down to the date that he was even going to do it. His wife decided to call my mum in the end and warned her, and my mum decided to put safety measures up, like making sure I was in groups and I had to be home by 4, etc. I was only told about all of this when I was about 14, and I still don't know all the details. Obviously, he never went through with his plan. But I'm sure glad Daniel's wife spoke to my mum when she did, because if she hadn't, it could have been a very different story for me. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor concert festival thing, and we parked at a mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our homes, and the venue was another 20 minutes away in a different direction. During the concerts, I ended up losing my friends in the crowd. I didn't care much, as I wanted to get to the front anyway, and I could just call them when the concert ended. And well, of course, I lose my phone somewhere in the sea of people and don't even notice until the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone, and I start to freak out a little bit. It's 10 p.m. when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus to my city is coming. And just my luck, it happens to be Memorial Day, so no buses until 10 a.m. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers that I know, my mum and my brother. My mum doesn't answer, but my brother does. He basically gives me the sucks to be you talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city that I don't know. I try walking, but quickly give up when I realize I'm basically walking down a random highway toward who knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger kind of creeps up behind me. He asks where I'm heading, and I tell him the truth. And he, conveniently, is going to the same city, and asks if I could split a cab with him. Realizing that this is my only option, as I didn't have enough money on my own, we get into the car together. And it turns out that he has less than I do. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my house, but at least I know my way home from there, right? But during the drive, this guy just gets progressively more creepy. He's aware that I'm 16 and he's 25. He scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting that I come with him back to his place, and even writes his number on my bare leg. As we get there, I realize the situation that I'm in. We're about to get out into a quiet area at 2 a.m., and the cabbie is going to drive off, leaving no one to hear me scream. And the second he gets out, I turn to the driver and beg him to please take me a few streets further so I could at least put some distance from him and me. The cab driver hadn't said a word the whole way, but he definitely heard everything. He asks me for my address and drives me all the way home, and the creeper watches as the cab just drives off, me still inside. When we get to my home, I offered to wake my mum up to pay him, but he happily declined, saying that he's just glad I'm safe. I broke in through the kitchen window, got to bed, and I just cried my tears of relief for who knows how long. I'm currently on vacation in Mexico with my family. The house where we're staying at is right on the beach, and it's very tranquil and scenic. My parents are in the main house with a kitchen and a living room, while my sister and I are in a second building with a bed and a bathroom. There's a small house before ours where the groundskeeper and her roughly 14 to 16-year-old son lives. So my sister and I went to sleep around midnight. I was dead asleep, but at 4 a.m. I woke up because I felt like I felt something on my leg. Tired and confused, I opened my eyes, and kneeling next to me on the ground, staring at me, was the groundkeeper's son. Right after noticing him, I started making some weird noises because the shock was pretty overwhelming. I had just woken up from a deep sleep, and for some reason, I just started slapping him on the back of the neck. He stood up and started speaking Spanish very rapidly, and I hardly know any Spanish, so I just pointed towards the door, loudly saying "get out" and "no comprende" and stuff like that, repeatedly. He eventually walked out after about a minute of yelling. My parents had heard my voice, and when they walked out of their house, they saw him standing outside of our door, and his mother heard the commotion as well, and my sister got up to explain what happened, being the only one who speaks Spanish fairly well. Then his mother apologized, and they went back to their house together. I eventually asked my sister what he was saying when he was standing by our bed next to me, but she said that because he was speaking so quickly and she was just waking up, that she didn't quite understand him, but this happened last night, which was only our second night here. He could have been watching us the night before as well, and that thought, it kind of terrifies me, I must admit. I'm pretty sure that I locked the door, but I know his mother has a key, so he still could have gotten in pretty easily. My sister and I are going to put glass bottles in the front door tonight to alert us if anyone tries to get in. If anybody has any suggestions of what we can do as well, they would be greatly appreciated at this point. I still have 5 more nights here, and I know that I'm probably going to see him at least once more. So this didn't happen to me, but to my dad. My dad is a very practical man and doesn't readily believe in the paranormal, but has had a few experiences that he definitely couldn't explain, and this was one of them. So in the 1980s, he worked as a deputy sheriff in a small, fairly rural southern town. He was on night shift and spent many hours just riding around empty back roads in the countryside, looking for drunk drivers, deer poachers, teens up to no good, etc. There was one area right out front of a little old diner that had a really bad intersection where a number of people had been killed in car accidents over the years. Aside from the diner, this was a very isolated area out in the boonies without much traffic, but a main highway did run through it, so you would occasionally see some cars. My dad was passing through this intersection one night around 2 or 3 in the morning on a routine patrol when suddenly he said that a dark shadowy figure just sort of appeared in the backseat of his patrol car while he was stopped at an intersection. The way his patrol worked, the backseat doors could not be opened from the outside or the inside, except with a special key. He said the figure's shape was hard to make out and it was really dark, but he got the impression that it was a man. And the creepy thing was that he could hear it breathing too, but it never spoke. He was pretty unnerved, obviously, and tried speaking to whatever it was, but it would never reply. Since he didn't exactly believe in ghosts, he didn't pull over, but continued to drive back to a more populated, well-lit area. He wasn't quite sure how to respond to this incident, and he just chalked it up to him just being tired as a way to rationalize it. But he says that he definitely wasn't tired enough to just imagine things like that. For about 8 miles he drove back into town with this shadowy mass just sitting in the back seat, silent except for the sounds of it breathing as a normal human would. As soon as he got to the first bridge over a river that led back into town, he said that whatever was in the back seat just vanished as quickly and silently as it appeared right before he began to cross over the bridge. It never once spoke, and he thoroughly checked his car once he got back to his apartment. There was absolutely nothing in his back seat that could have been mistaken for a figure like that too, nor any evidence that someone had been back there recently. And he said that was the one incident in his life that he could never explain, and that actually scared him too. Personally, I would have found a way out of that car ASAP, but he was in an isolated area with nowhere to really go. The intersection still exists, but the little diner at it has been boarded up for well over a decade now. It was never a very active place anyway, and the few times I've driven through there at night, I always think about my dad's experience, but I haven't experienced anything there myself, which I'm actually pretty grateful for, I must admit. I definitely don't linger on that stretch of highway, though. It's extremely dark with no houses or businesses around for miles, and spooky enough, even without knowing about my dad's encounter many years ago. So I went to Paris on my gap year back in 2017. I was there for about 4 days, and it was April, around the time of the attack where 3 policemen were shot, in fact. I happened to witness this from inside of a store when it happened and had to walk back to my hostel after, and I was about 19 at the time. But on my second day there, I think, I had some tickets to the Louvre. I set off in the morning, extremely excited and not at all daunted by anything. It was my first time travelling alone, out of the country in general. I'm British, but I loved it. I had Google Maps out, walking the whole way there was about 45 minutes, but I didn't mind. About 15 minutes in, though, I'm walking and a guy notices me, calls out a whistle and smiles at me. And, okay, I would be annoyed, but I'm in Paris. Who cares, right? So I carry on walking, and a few minutes later he appears next to me, smiling and saying hi. He's about early to mid-20s, very tan skin, I'm not sure of the nationality. I say hi back, surprised, thinking he must have been following me, which was strange. We begin to talk, and I'm telling he's travelling, and I've got tickets today. He asked me a lot of questions. I can't remember exactly what about, but we have a general conversation in my very, very poor French. I eventually ask him why he's following me, though, and doesn't he have somewhere to be? And this just doesn't faze him. He smiles and carries on talking, says that he doesn't have anywhere to be. Okay, so he starts saying that I should go to dinner with him tonight. I say great, and in my head I know that that's not going to happen, so I decided to start playing around with the conversation. I ask, do you smoke? And he looks surprised, and says yes, do you? Keep in mind too that his English is really poor, which I thought was odd because why would you attempt to talk to someone in English and find out about them if you know that you can't talk that well? But, oh well, right? So I look up weed in Google French and say, "Do you smoke weed?" He looks slightly confused but laughs and says, "Oh yeah, you come with me and we can smoke later." I laugh too, thinking, right mate. I don't smoke at all and I just did this because it was funny to throw him off a bit. But I also noticed that he doesn't really know his way around, which was odd. I wasn't bothered to ask his life story though, so I never found out where he did come from. But anyway, I told him that I have tickets already and I'm going straight in. I don't know why you're following me, but he doesn't mind me saying this and continues. Says that he'll wait for me. Or we can go for dinner later. You can come back to my apartment and meet my friends. We can smoke. But we eventually get there, and my heart is beating a little faster at this point, I must admit. I mean, I'm alone in a different country, and what do? Well, the entrance to this thing has a huge open space full of people, which was slightly comforting. I finally see that you can get your tickets at the kiosk, but this is the first time that I straight up walk away, ignore him and go there. There's an older guy who speaks English there too, for tourists obviously, and I say hello, I'd like to get a ticket, blah blah blah. He could have been English for all I know, but my mind was just going way too fast at a pace to notice. The guy is now stood at a distance though, watching me, and I look the man straight in the eye as he asks me a question and says, "There's a man following me." His expression changes and we keep eye contact the entire time. He says where, and I say to the far right. He glances and looks back at me. He asks a few questions, and I say, well, I'm going there straight away, so what's he doing? He tells me to go straight in, don't talk to him, and just walk away, and I agree. And the guy suddenly comes right up to me and says, "What's going on?" Or something to that effect anyway. We don't break eye contact, and the man says, "Are you going to be okay?" And it was at this point that I changed my tone and say, "Yes, thank you very much." The guy continues to follow me, but at this point, I'm over it and I just leave him behind. Going down an escalator, I see him watching me and I look around. The weird and kind of sad thing though is that I tried to tell all the security that they had, which was a lot mind you, down to the entrance, that there's a man following me and what do? A French lady behind the desk who stamps my ticket says, "Ticket please, make your way downstairs." And that was pretty much it. So, with no one listening to me, I go to a security desk in the event itself and say the same. This lady talks to me, asks my information, then proceeds to tell me that he was probably trying to rob me. In broad daylight though, following me for over 30 minutes? It doesn't seem likely, but there's definitely a cold feeling running all over my body at this point. I'm safe and sound inside this place because they had numerous soldiers with guns walking around the place, and outside too, so to an extent I wasn't in serious danger, but once again, being alone and young and my hostel far away, if I'd told him where I was staying, which he continuously asked for but I didn't tell him, something else could have happened entirely, and I'm so glad that I got to enjoy the rest of the trip, save for the shooting, without much hassle. I work at a spa here in my hometown, and I had recently left work one night 2 months ago. When I had left that morning, I realized I was low on gas, but because I was in a hurry to get to work on time, I figured that I'd just get some after my shift instead. So I'm driving on my way to get gas, and I remembered that a gas station was recently built near my neighborhood. Literally, right next to the turn into my neighborhood entrance, in fact. I was happy because it was on my traveling route home, and that meant not having to spend extra time driving. I've never been to this gas station before. Like I said, it's a new gas station, and I usually swing by somewhere else that's kind of close to my work because of how cheap the gas is compared to the other gas stations. However, it's difficult to get to because you have to cross traffic and wait forever at this one light. So that's why when I remembered there was a gas station near my neighborhood now, I was pretty happy and I went there instead. When I pulled into the place, I was looking towards the gas pumps, trying to decide which one I was going to pull up to. While driving by the entrance to the gas station, I could see out of my peripheral a man who was walking out of the gas station. He looked up at my car, and because I don't have any tint on my windows, I'm pretty sure that he saw me. But whatever, no big deal, I thought. I pulled up to a pump, and I could hear this man who was now walking towards the pump and towards a car that was parked on the exit opposite side of the gas pump that I decided to park and use, and he was yelling out and looking in the direction of the car on the other side of me. So I just ignored it and was getting my purse and keys together, getting ready to get out and walk into the gas station to pay. And for whatever reason, I looked over and saw that the car was packed full of guys. Not little punk teenage kids too, but like men in their late 20s and maybe early 30s. One in every seat too, it looked like. I'm not going to lie too, because it definitely freaked me out a bit. Because at the same time I looked over there, they were looking at me through the windows of the car. I have pepper spray on my keychain, so I dug around in my purse for it and held it in my hand as I got out of the car to walk inside. The pumps, thankfully, aren't really far away. However, they are off to the side, so unless you're standing at the door of the gas station, it's kinda hard to see over there from inside the place. I got out of my car, though, and began to walk, when, not even a few steps in, I heard them start their car up, and I was relieved because I figured that they were leaving and all would be well. But that didn't seem to be the deal, because instead of leaving, they turned their car around and got directly behind me. Literally, their car was right on my heels. I mean, if they had pressed the gas pedal even an inch, they would have definitely run over me and flattened me like a pancake. I instantly went on red alert mode and realized that I was almost to the entrance and I was definitely within eyesight now if anyone was inside, but by the looks of the parking lot, there wasn't. My nerves got the best of me though, and even though I had pepper spray, I ended up doing the weird little awkward jog and fast walk inside the store, desperate to put some space between us. When I got inside, I instantly went into the girls' bathroom, hoping that maybe I could wait them out, or that maybe they wouldn't even bother to come inside and would just leave me instead. I must have stayed in there for maybe 3 to 5 minutes or so, and when I decided to finally leave the bathroom and pay for my gas, I realized that there was people inside the gas station now. With a quick glance, none of the faces looked like the ones that I saw in the car, so I walked up to the register to take my place in line, just wanting to finally be able to go home. After a few minutes, I'm almost to the register. I'm second in line to be exact, and I'm looking around at all the items on the counter, and in doing so, I notice a guy standing behind the line off to the side against the wall. He just happened to put his head down like he was looking at the floor at the same moment, and I noticed him, so I couldn't see his face to know for sure if it was one of the guys from the car, but it was suspicious for sure. I looked back at the register though and realized that it's my turn to check out. I walk up and pay for my gas, and in the process of putting my debit card back in my wallet, I see that guy who was against the wall begin to walk to the door, but he's doing it really dramatic. Almost like he's trying to time it out just right so he can be next to me while I'm walking out the door. At the thought of this, and realizing I was holding up the line by not moving, I did some quick thinking and began to walk towards the door, and like I thought, if this guy hurries up and starts walking faster and I can recognize him as being the exact guy who had walked out of the gas station when I was pulling in, I could do something. So I instantly stopped walking and just stepped to the side out of the way of the entrance to the door, hoping that I was pulling a quick one on him. I started making a scene of putting my wallet into my purse and rummaging around in it, acting like I was trying to find something, just trying to kill enough time to where he'd be forced to walk ahead of me instead of behind me. This guy, however, was a quick thinker too, I guess, because when he did walk past me and got to the doors of the entrance, he stopped and held them open and stared directly at me and smiled. And this smile gave me the chills instantly. Trying to think of what to do, I look at him and for some stupid reason smile back, and he smiles even wider at this. I instantly hate myself for being that dumb girl who can't just flick guys off or curse at them or something whenever they think they're dealing with a creep. So I'm staring at him, realizing that I have to make a move at some point, and I look past him and realize the car full of guys is now parked right at the front of the store. Lights on, car running with one of the backseat doors wide open. By now, I'm freaking out internally, obviously, and even though this feels like hours, it's actually all going down in a matter of minutes. I look behind me, towards the register, hoping someone would be paying and leaving. And thankfully, that exact thing happened right then. A man started walking towards the door, and when he walked by me, I walked with him and I made sure to get on the side that was opposite of the man standing at the door, holding them open. The second that I got outside, I made a quick right because I saw that there were more cars parked on that side and ran between them towards my car. I hurried and unlocked my door and got inside and locked the doors and waited. I just had a feeling that it wasn't going to be that easy. And I was right. The car of the guys had reversed and was heading towards my gas pump. I'm still the only one there actually getting gas, I remind you. So I instantly hit the lock for the car doors again, just to make sure they're good and locked. The car slows down as it's driving past me and gets a little in front of me and just stops. I am frozen with fear at this point. I think about calling someone, but I don't really care for dealing with the police due to my history with them, and I knew my friends couldn't do anything to help me but panic with me, which probably wouldn't have helped. So I decided that I was just going to sit inside my car and try to wait them out. And let me tell you that I would have died in that car from a lack of oxygen before I got out and left. I didn't want to leave because I had already prepaid for my gas and I didn't want them following me either. Finally, after about 10 to 15 minutes, they eventually drove off. Windows rolled down, calling me all kinds of provocative names. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes just to be safe before getting out and hurrying to pump my gas. When I got home, I called a friend who lives in my neighborhood also. I told them what happened and that if they go to that gas station at night, be very careful. She replied back saying how she's heard from other people in the neighborhood that, for whatever reason, a lot of sketchy people seem to hang around there at night. Sometimes, even when the gas station is closed for the night, you can drive by there and see a group of guys just hanging out around the gas pumps for whatever sketchy reason. I did go back to that gas station a few days later one morning to speak to the owner. I explained the situation and gave the best description I could of the man that I saw inside the store and the make of the car and the colour and all that. I haven't been back though to see if it's happened to anyone else or if they caught them or whatnot, and I honestly probably never will. In fact, I'll gladly spend an extra 5 minutes driving to the other gas station before I even think about going back there, especially if it's at night. So I'll start this by saying that I was raised by some pretty religious people. A lot of my family would talk about ghosts and demons and such as if they definitely existed. But as I got older, old enough to reason, I realized that they were nuts. I mean, sure, there have been several experiences in life where something strange may have happened, but I almost always would find reasonable explanations for them. I'm about 30 now, and I've been a lifelong skeptic of anything paranormal all this time, pretty much. And well, recently my family and I moved into a new home. It's actually a fairly new home, and we've been here for about 3 months now. But after the first few weeks, I noticed I would get a sort of uneasy feeling around the stairs and hallway. It's to the point where I just don't look down the hall at night, and I've never been afraid of the dark before, or what may be in the past, but not since a child at least. One day though, I was walking down the hallway, and I swear to you that I heard someone whisper my name as if they were right behind my head. It freaked me out, of course, but I just wrote it off as my mind playing tricks on me. I mean, there's been several times that I'll hear my daughter's toy start playing music or the dishes would make noises downstairs, but again, I always wrote these things off and never told my wife about it. After a month or so of being here, my wife texted me when I was at work and says, "I swear that this house is haunted. I'm upstairs and I hear the dishes clinking downstairs." So I decided to tell her that I've sort of had that feeling too, but never said anything because I figured it was just me. My daughter is 3 years old and she still sleeps in our bed. A couple of weeks go by and out of nowhere she sits up at around 3:30 a.m. and calmly says that she's afraid of the dark. When I tell her that there's no need to be afraid of the dark and that her mum and dad are right next to her, she points towards the hall, the same one I try not to look down at night, and says, "But where did the little girl go?" Her mum told her and assured her that she was just having a dream, and then says, "What the F do to me," before going to sleep herself. While all of these things make me feel a certain way, I still wouldn't consider any of it real. My mind can rationalize anything that I just mentioned. Until this next thing happened, a couple of weeks ago, that is. So this next story is definitely not a trick of the mind or imagination. It's not something that I think may have happened, but it's something that just 100% happened. It happened right in front of my wife and I both. So we were upstairs getting ready for bed. Wife is in bed and daughter is already asleep, and I'm in our master bathroom getting ready to sleep myself. As I walk to the bed, I realize I left the bathroom light on. It just shines into our bedroom as there's no door separating the bathroom and the bedroom. So I turned around and turned off the switch before hopping into bed. As soon as I lay down, I set my alarm, probably stare at my phone for a minute or two, and then close my eyes. As soon as I close my eyes, I hear a click, and then my wife say, "And that bathroom light just turned itself back on." I open my eyes, completely dumbfounded. I mean, I had just turned that light off no more than 5 minutes ago, and it definitely just turned itself on again. Now, this is not an incident where I may have turned off the light in a room, left the room, and then found the light was still on in the previous room or something. This is a light switch being flipped on in the very room that I was in, right in front of me and my wife. Me being the person that I am, though, I thought maybe the switch was just halfway between on and off, and I tried really hard to replicate that scenario, but I just don't see how I could do that. The switch is either on or off, and there's no in between. And it's this very event, in addition to all the other strange noises and feelings, that have me at least considering the idea of the paranormal being real now. But don't get me wrong, I'm still not ready to look anyone in the eyes and say ghosts are real, but in my 30 years of living, that's one of the only truly unexplainable events that happened right in front of me, and for the first time ever, it happened with a witness right next to me. Pretty crazy stuff, if you ask me. I live in Kentucky. It's very backwards and rural here, and although I've lived here for a year now, I'm still not used to the extreme amount of woods and isolated areas. Coming from the beaches in Florida, things are very different here, and it's still taking me a while to adapt to my surroundings. I live in my parents' house in a rural area. Although it's next to a highway, it's not necessarily the most populated area, with 2 gas stations and a dollar store. That's it for about 20 minutes in all directions as well, which in my opinion means it's decently rural. Anyway, we live on an acre of land, and about 30 yards behind our house is a large 150-acre farm belonging to a farmer. But keep in mind too that we've never seen this guy before, but he does plant his plants during, plant season. For the year that we've lived up here too, there's been a lot of just weird stuff going on. But to name a few, there's been times where, for a lack of a better term, I've seen a ghost, I've heard random noises, and although aliens may not be considered paranormal, I swear to you that I've heard high-frequency noises and seen lights in the sky as well. But we do live around 30 miles from Fort Knox, so could be military stuff perhaps, I don't know. Now, this is where the road takes a deep turn though. I, as well as my family, have noticed that none of our surrounding neighbours, about 6 of them, is out past around 9 PM at night. Now, I can kind of understand that, but, there were always at least a few people up and about during the night where I came from. But there's not even a single late night party or anything here. Nothing at all. These people just do not come out at night. I thought it was odd at first, but I didn't pay it much notice until, recently. Me and a few friends would occasionally get together and go out at around 1 in the morning on the back porch and smoke and stargaze and just have a good time. Each time we would do that, the field, 100 feet away, would start rustling with noises, as if someone was running through the underbrush. Me and my friends, higher than kites, would normally just laugh it off, but that was until we heard a shrieking-like noise from that area. needless to say, we haven't done that ever since, and that was about a month ago now. Ever since then, it's just really messed me up. I constantly worry that there's some type of wolf out there or something that lurks around at night, and I must admit that was my assumption too until 2 nights ago. 2 nights ago, I was outside at 11:18 on the spot. We have a compost bin, so after I cleaned the kitchen, I took the scraps of food and all the other stuff out there. It was pretty dark, but it was peaceful. I should mention now too that we have a steel fence around our acre of property, with the compost at the far back of the property next to the fence. The fence also has a gate on it that opens into the farm's field. I don't know why, but it's just there. And anyway, as I made my way to the compost, a huge sense of an unnerving feeling erupted just all around me. I just felt like I was being watched, or perhaps even stalked. It was dark as hell and I couldn't see anything. I only had enough visible light from our outside porch light to just see in front of me. I dumped the scraps of the food into the compost, and then I heard the exact same rustling noise through the underbrush. I got ballsy here, and I had a feeling that there was some jackass teen or someone else trying to scare me, so I stood still for about 20 seconds in the direction of the noise. And here's where I start to panic. I took my phone out of my pocket, shook it twice to turn the flashlight on, and shined it in the direction of the noise, and nothing really to see but brushes and soybean plants. But something odd caught my eye. A reflection. I stood confused for a second and shined my light back over there where the reflection was, and holy hell, there was some maybe 4-foot tall thing crouched in some soybean plants, and it was looking right at me with huge red eyes. To be quite honest too, I'm not sure how I acted. I know that I ran inside as fast as I could, and even though my asthma is horrible, that is the fastest that I've ever run. Needless to say, I came into the house, locked the door, and ran downstairs into the basement. My room has no windows, both a blessing and a curse, but there was no way in hell that that monstrosity was coming into my room. Eventually I passed out though, and woke up last night at about 7, missed dinner and everything else, but immediately went outside to the same spot. And nothing was there. I even walked into the field to see if maybe what I saw were just red berries or something, but there was nothing. After walking back to the house, the next door neighbor was out. I immediately called out to him, and as he came over, I asked him if he's ever seen anything abnormal around here, which his reply was, "Everyone I know, including myself, goes inside before nightfall. There's tales of hellcats and nightcrawlers just all around here." And with that, he just went to go put out his grill and went inside. I didn't sleep much last night. Mainly, I was just talking to my friends about everything, and since most of them live in Elizabethtown, about 25 minutes away, decent-sized city, they have no idea what the heck it was. Anyway, I'm pretty much lost for words at this point, and if you've listened to this so far, thank you very much for putting the time in to listen to me. I'm pretty freaked out right now, and I really don't know what to do. It could have been an animal, I'm sure, but that thing looked nothing like any animal that I've ever seen. I'm debating right now whether to go outside with a high-beam flashlight and scan the area from my porch, but to be honest, I may just crap myself this time if I see it again. Please, if anyone is from Kentucky, fill me in. Oh, and by the way too, I told my mum about this, and I could just tell by the look in her eyes that something was very wrong. After I explained it to her, she said that she was out on the porch one night talking to a friend when she heard someone climb over the metal fence and could hear footsteps gaining on her. She just noped the heck out of there and went inside in the span of a few seconds. It was really strange, and she couldn't see anything at all, and our fence is about 4.5, 5 foot tall. We also have a fenced-in porch as well, and I'm not too sure what's going on, but it definitely isn't normal. Oh, and I almost forgot about this too, but on the farmer's land, about 80 foot from the edge of our land, there's a sinkhole that's connected to a small cave. I haven't thought about that at all, but there's literally fallen down trees and stuff that sunk into the ground and just a cave opened up. And I'm wondering, what if that thing lives in there? I've also been suggested by some people to get trail cams and whatnot, and I'll do that when I can, but right now I'm just going to use a spotlight at night and night vision camera to catch something. I'll also be taking footage of the layout of my place, but I just don't know how to post it. Here's one thing too that some people have commented on. Dogs. The neighbours to the left of us have about 4 hound dogs. Ironically, they're pretty quiet during the day, and sometimes nights, but often they begin to bark and just kind of go crazy at some point. It's really strange, and I think this could be leading on to something, but maybe the dogs are sensing something. It's really odd because the same night that I had the encounter, the dogs were in fact barking. I forgot to mention that, but also there's something that's really freaking me out at this point. Ever since last night, there's been a really strange noise. I can only describe it as a bird singing, except it's kind of in a loop and it's really distant. Anyway, I heard the noise last night and it sounded like it was on the damn driveway. And today, when I heard it again, I followed the noise, but as I got closer, it seemed to just go further away, which was very strange and eerie indeed. I've tried to think about what the noise could be from, but I've just never heard a noise like that in my entire life. I did some research by our county records today as well, and apparently the land owned by the farmer used to be government property in the 1960s and 80s. That's really strange to me, and it didn't exactly state why, and I know almost all property is government owned until you buy it, but back in the 1890s it was owned by farmers yet again and then bought out. All that was available there for the government control was not available, like it literally said unavailable. I'll figure out a way to post a picture because this is in the City Hall records. Also, there was a man-made crater built somewhere out there, and it used to be over 600 acres of controlled property, meaning the rest is all around. It even looks like our own house used to be on it too. And this definitely bats an eye. I'm starting to wonder if there was some sort of experiment or if there was a reason for it. I definitely still find this pretty strange, but I haven't heard anything today other than a strange occurrence outside. Or was it about 10 PM having a smoke when everything, and I mean everything outside, just became dead quiet. No bug noise, no crickets, no chirping, nothing. Just dead silent. I don't know what that means, but I finished up and I just went the hell inside. Something very weird just happened. I was home alone, or I thought I was anyway. Dad left for work early in the morning at around 4, and my mum left to go to the store just 2 hours ago. I was going out of my room to go and get a snack when I noticed that my dad was sitting on the couch from my point of view. That's what it looked like anyway. I could only see the top of his head. I was surprised because I didn't even hear him come back in, so I said, "Hey Dad, when did you get back home? I didn't even hear you open the door." And he said, "Oh, well, I only came back about 10 minutes ago." Something felt very off about that, but I didn't question it. So I just said, "Oh, okay," and continued walking to get my snack. Before I could get to our pantry, he asked me, "So what time is Mum getting home?" I said, I don't know, she called and said that she was checking out, so probably about another 30 minutes. Why?" Just wondering, kid." That was weird because my dad never calls me kid. And when he said that, his voice was a little deeper too. I got a bad feeling, so I turned around and walked towards the couch, only to notice that there was no one sitting on the couch. I looked around, really confused because, well, he was just there. I went to the window and realized that my dad's car isn't even in the driveway. It's been about an hour since this happened, and my mum's already home. This isn't the first time weird things have been happening around here, and I doubt that it's going to be the last. When I was around 15, I had started babysitting a family with 3 kids, 2 boys and 1 girl. Their mum knew me, and the oldest was friends with my little brother, and had asked my mum if I could help out just because she had started taking on more shifts and her husband was doing the same. They lived right next to my high school and paid well, so I agreed, despite not really having that much experience. And pretty quickly, I realized that this was going to be difficult. The kids were great, but I was nervous around them. The oldest was fine, just played on his Xbox most of the time while doing homework. But the two youngest, man, they were a completely different story. The middle child, daughter, was completely obsessed with horror movies, and on more than one occasion, I had to hide the knives from her since she wanted to reenact them, and the youngest son even tried to set fire to the Christmas tree. I know what kids can be like, since I have a lot of younger and older cousins, but these ones, they just drove me insane, and I would constantly worry about them hurting themselves or even each other. If they played up, I would threaten to call their mum, which normally would work. It was after a few months, though, that I realised if I'd mentioned the dad, that's when they would really just behave and do what I had asked, so that's what I started doing. Now, I never really met the dad. I just knew the guy was really tall and big build, but was always described to me as still being really nice, so I never thought about it. On this occasion, I'd said to the youngest boy that I would call his dad if he didn't stop behaving, which resulted in a huge tantrum. So I ended up calling him and explaining. Luckily for me, the dad was getting off work early, so he said that he would come back home as quick as he could and apologizes for the kid's behavior. When I had explained this, the kid was sobbing and ended up locking himself in his room. That day, the dad got home and they weren't joking when they said that he was tall. I'm only 5'3" and was 15, and when I saw him crouching a little to get through the door because of his size, I remember thinking, holy crap, no wonder the kids won't misbehave when he's there. I said hi and apologized for the work call, which he just brushed off and said that it needed to be done and not to worry. We were both sat on the couch, and I can't really remember why, but I think they were talking about what days they needed me for or something. Now, at this stage, the two youngest had went outside to play while I was with the oldest, as I had just been tidying up a little from dinner. I was pretty weirded out too, because his oldest started getting pretty antsy when asked to go to the shop. He kept making excuses to his dad, so I just offered to go instead. I could see the dad visibly frustrated and just wanted to defuse the situation. I would like to point out too that everything seemed pretty much normal at this point, but I remember feeling really intimidated by the dad. I'd only met him this one time and spoke for no more than 20 minutes. It turns out that the oldest had said to his mum that he didn't want me left alone with his dad, as he had apparently been watching me a little too closely during a short encounter. The parents had asked me to babysit later on in that week, which I had agreed to. However, in the space of a few days, that quickly changed. I got a text from the mum apologising for the last-minute arrangements, but saying that I couldn't babysit. I was a little agitated since I had changed my plans, but wasn't too bothered, and just said that it was fine and just let me know when she needs me. She had asked me to come around to get my pay for the last 2 weeks, and I just decided to nip around before going home. And as soon as I was in that house, I could tell that something was off, but not wanting to pry, I just went in and said hi, talked about our books for a little bit, and then just left. It wasn't until the next week, I think, or maybe the week after, that everything kicked off. So I came home to my mum being upset and quite angry, pacing in the living room while my stepdad was trying to calm her down. I immediately went to her, asking what was wrong, but feeling a little worried, I must admit. And instantly, she just threw her arms around me and started crying and holding me. I had meant to be babysitting, but again, I got cancelled on, so I was home earlier than what I said I was originally going to be. Pulling away confused, though, I asked her what was wrong. Turns out, my mum had been trying to get a hold of me, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit and nobody was home, so I just decided to head back on the bus, but wasn't able to let my mum know. She sits me down, though, and starts trying to ask me questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I had mentioned that I'd only met him once and only really spoke to him on the phone, a handful of times if that, when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mum started pressing on and asked if anything else had happened and kept questioning me, saying I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused and told her that nothing had happened and asked what this was all about. I always remember her taking a deep breath at this point and saying, "Oh, thank God," before letting me know what happened. Now, as I said, the details are vague because this was on the news, But it turns out the guy had killed someone while working and been taken in by the police. During interrogation, it turns out that he admitted to beating his wife, and there were speculations of assaults. There was also mention that one of his types were petite girls that had dark hair, pale, which happened to match my description at the time, and my mum was obviously terrified in case something bad had happened to me. I'm turning 23 this year, and it still gives me the shivers when I think about it. I remember feeling like I was just going to throw up, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach for days. My mum held me close, crying because she had worried sick all day and scared in case something bad had happened to me. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for the family right there and then. I had felt so awful for the wife, though, as she was honestly one of the nicest women that I had ever met. About a week later, I got a text from her. As it turns out, I had left some books, so I had said that I would go get them after phone. And when I saw her, my heart just sank. She had obviously not slept and was putting on a brave face for the kids who weren't sure what was going on. We ended up sitting in the kitchen and I gave her a hug, just trying to comfort her. I had mentioned that if she needed help with the kids, since it was gone now, I would try and help, but she immediately refuses as, it turned out, people had started attacking the house. She gave me my stuff, paid for the wages with a little more added. I completely forgot, and said that she appreciated it, but it would be better off if I just took a step back from the family, as she didn't want me getting hurt for being associated with them. To this day, I still think about them, and it still scares me after thinking about what could have happened. I still talk to the younger kids, who are a lot older now, and even helped tutor her younger girl. I helped the oldest when he started high school because I noticed the kids bullying him for what his dad had done, which was awful, considering that it wasn't the fault of the entire family. So I had just gotten back from the beach, and I went inside the house looking for my grandmother. The door was unlocked, and she never leaves without locking the door. I didn't see her on the couch, and her bedroom door was not closed, so I knew she wasn't taking a nap, but like I said, it was odd that she wasn't on the couch or the front porch. I glanced at the table, and there was no note. I called for her, and I heard a kind of muffled noise. I thought it was a muffled call for help at first, so I ran into the back. I didn't see her on the bed, so I ran to the bathroom, and she wasn't there either. I called again for her and didn't hear anything, so I looked around the bathroom once more and then back to the bedroom, and I swear that I saw her laying on the floor in the bedroom. I saw her long enough and well enough to see what she was wearing, a blue sweater and jeans. I blinked though, and when I did, she just wasn't there, and for a moment I thought I just imagined it, so I ran to the front of the house and looked around, and maybe to get my mum or something. This time, though, I saw my grandmum's neon yellow notepad on the kitchen table. It was so bright that it was impossible not to see, and there was a note saying that she went across the street for a second. I felt so disorientated and confused for a second. I went back outside, and there was my grandmother with the neighbour. And she was wearing a completely different outfit, too. I didn't tell anyone because, well, I didn't want to freak anyone out. Plus, I don't know if anyone will believe me anyway. But I just kind of hope that whoever that other person was, I hope they get help. Some years ago, me and my friends went for a drive in an unused quarry, and now national park here in the UK. And we spent a fair amount of time there throughout our teenage years too. Being the teenagers that we were, we would find ways of entertaining ourselves, sometimes at the expense of others. Nothing too sinister, but being your usual kids that had nothing more to do. One of our favourite pastimes would be to turn off our headlights and park up discreetly so no other cars could see us. A lot of people would park up there and smoke weed and whatnot, out of sight of the police. We would hide in the car in the dark, and once we saw someone pull up to have a quiet smoke, we'd pretend to be the police, i.e. flash a blue light and play a siren as loud as possible on our sub. We found it funny, okay, but I get it. Not all that good. Well, obviously, this would result in the people in the car panicking and trying to hide their weed to drive off as fast as possible. Funnily enough, too, we ended up making several friends from doing this once they realized that it was just a joke. Over the years, though, pretty much every night that we were up there, we could see a motorhome parked up in the same spot. We never paid them any mind because you could never see inside it, and it always seemed dormant and dark anyway. The motorhome was clearly a very dated model and was pretty dirty. The only thing other than it looking slightly out of place, though, was that it had the biggest antenna on top that I'd ever seen. Now, one night, it was extremely quiet up in the quarry, and we were about to go home because there wasn't really anything to do, or should I say, no one to terrorize. One of our friends asked why we hadn't given any grief to the people in the motorhome. We explained what I said before, and it just never seemed like there was anyone home anyway. After some time, though, we decided that we'd bang on the doors and try to shake the vehicle and scream "earthquake." Again, please bear in mind that we were really bored, stupid teenagers. All four of us got out of the car as quietly as we could and sneaked all around the dirty motorhome. We counted to 3, tried to hide our giggles, and began our plan. We shook and banged and shouted "earthquake" at the top of our lungs, and after about 30 seconds, there was no response. We all looked at one another because there was clearly no one home and it felt completely anticlimactic. We began to walk back to the car, which wasn't too much of a distance away, when the motorhome door opened at a pretty relaxed pace. We all heard the creak of the door and spun around to see who it was, and we all stood frozen at what we were seeing. People began to pile out of the motorhome, not quickly and not slowly, but like nothing had happened. Now, that was strange enough, but the part that made our blood turn cold was the fact that they were all wearing masks, black masks. They were covered in matching black cloaks, and there must have been around 8 or 9 of them too. It's safe to say, though, that we booked it. We ran like we'd never ran before, straight back to the car and jumped in, starting up the engine and speeding off out of the quarry. 3 of us looked back to see if they were following us, and luckily, they weren't. They were just standing there, looking in our direction. The door to the motorhome was still open, though, and as we were driving away, we could see that it was lit by candlelight, and candlelight alone. No wonder we could never see any light coming from the windows at night. Obviously, there could be an explanation for this, like maybe they were playing a trick on us because we used to play tricks on everyone else at the park. Either way, it was pretty terrifying. My son is one of the most honest little boys that I've ever met. I'm biased, I know, but still. I was very young when my son was conceived, and he was a huge shock to both me and his father, as I was actually on birth control. But nevertheless, he is the most loved and spoiled little boy ever. He is literally the light of all my darkness too, and there's definitely a reason as to why he's here, planned or not. He's meant for this world. My ex, father of my son, had a best friend who died exactly a year before my son was born. His name was Dean, and sadly he passed away on the 13th of July. But my son was born exactly a year later on the 13th of July as well. Dean tragically lost his life from jumping into open water on a hot day, and his body instantly went into shock. He suffered a major heart attack and died within seconds. He was an extremely talented and thoughtful guy as well, and it was a huge loss for everyone that knew him. When I found out that I was pregnant with a little boy, my ex and I came to the decision to have Dean as my son's middle name as a tribute to his friend. We were extremely shocked when my due date was the 13th, and even more shocked when my son was born on his due date as well. We always knew that there would be a connection between both of them, as there were just too many coincidences. My ex and I split when my son was 6 months old, and he only sees him occasionally due to living many miles away. And naturally, my son never heard the story of Dean from me, as I didn't feel it was my place to tell it, and we wanted to ensure that he was old enough to understand anyway. But my son did all the regular strange things when he was small, though, smiling and waving at nothing, talking and playing with someone no one could see, etc. He is also a regular sleepwalker, as am I. It's very common for him to be up and about at night, so I'm very used to his state when he's sleepwalking and when he's actually awake. He would sleepwalk and do strange things though, like try to run a bath or stand in the middle of his bedroom talking to walls, stuff like that, but you get used to it. Around 4 months ago though, he woke up calling me. Not distressed, but clearly wanted me in the room as soon as I could get there. I half expected him to be sleepwalking when I got there, but he was wide awake. He told me that in the middle of his bedroom he saw a boy with long hair in a pool of water, and he was smiling at him. It took me a while to be able to reply, as I was pretty shocked, obviously. I asked him if he was asleep or dreaming, and he said no. He'd woken up because he heard a splash and saw this boy. He went back to sleep eventually, and that weekend my son saw his dad, and I explained to my ex what had happened, and he was as shocked as I was. I explained that I thought it was time to tell him the story of Dean and see how my son would react. He agreed and told me that he would update me when he came to drop him off the following day. The next day my son came home, his usual bubbly self, and my ex updated me. He explained that he first told my son that he was named after one of his close friends who was now in heaven. He then proceeded to show him a picture of Dean, and my son instantly said, "Oh, that's the boy. That's the boy from the water. He was in my bedroom." My ex said that he was both freaked out and ecstatic that he'd come back to see my son. My ex then said that he was a lovely guy and that he would have loved my son. My son then said, "I know, he's very smiley. I know that water is very dangerous." And my ex was stunned. He nodded and said, "That's right," and that was how Dean had died. It's so true that children are just so much more open than us adults. And to this day, neither me or my ex can explain what happened, other than Dean visiting my son. So I was a part of an access course that allowed older students who want to go to university to get the grades to get in. I was one of the youngest in the class at 23, 24 by the end of this story, with the vast majority of my class ranging between 32 and 53. And oh my goodness, there are so many stories that I could share about that class, the class from hell, but I digress. During the year, I pretty much kept to myself in class, being socially awkward and all, and I was still picked on by the rest of my class though, because I wasn't from the same area as everyone else, and my voice doesn't sound like I'm from where I said that I was from, which is incredibly petty if you ask me, but it is what it is. That actually was one of the reasons though that I ended up befriending a girl who was named Tina. Now, Dave was a 40-year-old man who was strange to say the least. Just to let you know, Dave was slightly shorter than me. I'm 5'10". He was overweight, balding, with the hair that he had being grey at the sides and black at the top. Looked really greasy and, honestly, just looked a bit older than he was, but to his credit, he was always fairly well dressed. Dave was well liked though, and was selected to be the class representative, but he always just seemed off and actually made me feel very uncomfortable because he always was acting weird towards me. He would always look like he was forcing a smile and was constantly bragging about things that, well, aren't exactly brag-worthy. I've worked the last 3 days on 12-hour shifts and still made it to college because education is important. Stuff like that. I've only spoken to Dave outside the group project 2, maybe 3 times, and every time he just came across as though something was wrong, even though the conversations were basically elevator talk with a touch of bragging. So I just kept contact to a minimum with him. He openly made statements in class like, "I can tell if someone is mentally ill just by looking at them," and young people today don't understand the idea of getting off their asses and working. They'd rather take, to give you an impression of what kind of person he was. On a number of occasions too, I felt like someone was just watching me, and when I would check, I would immediately see who it was, and I bet you can guess who it was, right? Yep, Dave. As the year went on though, my class got worse while he was keeping up on the "I'm a nice guy" routine. Honestly, I just ignored him most of the time, but did wonder what was making the class become worse. But this was a while after the group project thing. It wasn't until the last day though that I found out why. I was talking to Tina, saying how amazing it was that we both completed the course and got on with our lives, till Tina said, "I know, thank God, I don't have to see Dave again. He was really creepy. I don't know what his deal was." I asked her what she meant by that, which prompted her to say, "Hold on, do you know what he's been saying?" Tina told me everything that he said, and all of it was about me. According to Tina, Dave had been saying some crazy stories revolving around me and would always ask her questions about me and my life, asking her about where I grew up and what I wanted to do with my life, about my family even. That really creeped me out, but then came the stories that he was telling to my class. Dave had been saying a lot apparently, to the point that if I knew about this at the time, I would have reported him for harassment or something, anything to get him as far away from me as possible. Apparently, he'd been saying how I'm a desperate attention seeker who was begging him to be friends with me, saying how I used mental illness and health problems for people to feel sorry for me and get better grades, and how I don't deserve to go to university because I'm fake. Those made me laugh at first because of how pathetic I thought that was, considering we barely spoke, but then it felt uncomfortable because somehow he knew about my health problems, and considering that no one except the lectures knew about them, I wondered how exactly he found out about them. But then came the wild stories that never even happened. According to Dave, I tried to hug him multiple times. One story was when he told me that he got into university, allegedly, and I was jumping for joy and forcibly hugged him, screaming how proud I was of him as he awkwardly and unwillingly hugged me back before pushing me away. The second story, we were leaving class when I turned in front of the lecturer and forcibly hugged him again as he resisted before I skipped out of the room saying, "See you later, friend," with the lecturer and him mocking me after I left. The third, and my personal favourite, is supposedly during another class. I turned to Dave and was yet again trying to force him to hug me, but this time he kept telling me to stop, but I laughed at his cries. It wasn't until the lecturer intervened by saying, "Stop it, you are not friends," that apparently I stopped. I was taken aback by the stories and thought maybe it was still made up for amusement or something. But no, when I saw another girl in my class, I tried to ask her about the rumors, but the second I mentioned his name, the girl screamed at me, "Leave Dave alone, you psycho. Honest to God, why the hell are you so obsessed with him? He'll never talk to you." And she just stormed off. Obviously, I was pretty shocked. Tina apologized to me for not telling me sooner, but she honestly didn't know. Now, just so you know, I hate confrontation. Most of the time I just try to avoid it, but I just couldn't let this one go. I don't care if people call me names, that's just a basic insult, and coming from my class who knew nothing about me, it made those kind of comments even more meaningless. But commenting on my character, saying made-up stories and calling me crazy, I do not take that well. Later on in the day, I saw Dave, but when I approached him to confront him about all of this, he looked as though he saw a ghost and he just ran away. I ended up messaging Dave on Facebook, and I sure hope that this is the end of it, but somehow, I'm not so sure. It creeps me out to this day that all this time he had been talking to me and imagining these incidences while I was just none the wiser. And I, for one, hope that I never see him again.